The second week of term, autumn tightened its grip on Hogwarts. The weather grew colder, the days shorter. By the time the last lessons ended, it was nearly dark. The plants in the greenhouse had gone sluggish, and Professor Sprout had the second years up to their elbows in repotting mandrakes. The homping willow's leaves were yellowing. The trees at the edge of the forbidden forest were starting to shed, and some mornings the treetops wore a lace of white frost that made everything look almost unreal. Loren and the others were walking slowly, hands in their pockets, toward Hagrid's hut. They took the familiar path into the trees, turned right at the fork, and a few more steps brought them to the little house. They'd walked this route hundreds of times over 5 years. They could have done it blindfolded. Still, their pace was leaden. The short walk beyond the castle gates felt like a trek through mountains and rivers. It wasn't that they were tired. It was guilty consciences slowing them down. Each of them felt it. Since their first year, they'd been freeloading meals from Hagrid, steaming stew, fresh vegetables, pumpkins from his patch, all organic and pest-free by Hagrid's standards. They'd never missed out on anything except the rock cakes. Sometimes they even took food home to their families. Hagrid had never balked. He doted on them. The unicorn hair Loren had used for his first alchemy practice had come from Hagrid. Hermione had had her birthday at the hut more than once. Ron could out-eat Fang. Harry was practically a godfather. He'd brought Hagrid his acceptance letter and taken him to Diagon Alley. And yet none of them had signed up for care of magical creatures. How could they now face the half-giant who cared for the forest? Fang greeted them first, a flurry of wagging tails and ecstatic barking. He burst from behind the hut and bounced around their legs, trying to lick faces and jump up in an all-over welcome. "Don't encourage him. He'll eat your fingers off," Hagrid warned from the doorway in that slow drawl of his. Hagrid came out carrying a sack of potatoes and wearing the giant floral apron Hermione had given him at Christmas. At the sight of them, his face fell into that long, drawn "oh." That meant he was more hurt than angry. "Oh, it's you lot. Hagrid, we." They couldn't bring themselves to speak. Hagrid cast them a look, shuffled back inside, and slammed the door. Hermione clutched at Loren's sleeve, eyes full of regret. "We've broken his heart," she murmured. Loren squeezed her hand. "Hagrid won't stay mad," he whispered, and gave Harry a nudge toward the door. Harry stepped up, knocked hard, and called, "Hagrid, open up! We want to talk!" There was no answer. Fang cocked his head and looked between them and the closed door with an almost human confusion. Harry sighed, drew his wand, and held it up. "Hagrid, if you don't open up, I'll blast the door down. It's the door-blasting spell I learned from Loren. Do you know how strong that is?" Hermione's eyes lit up, and she started to count, conspiratorial. "I'm counting down. 5, 4. Before Harry could get to 3, the door cracked open. Hagrid stood in the doorway, apron tied, looking stunned and indignant. "I'm a professor. Professor Hagrid, yes. Potter, how dare you threaten me?" "Well, excuse me, sir," Harry drawled, dragging out the last word. Hagrid spluttered. "Since when did you start calling me sir?" Harry shot back just as quickly. "Since when did you start calling me Potter?" Hagrid's indignation faltered and then deflated. He muttered, Go on, come in, you ungrateful lot," and stepped aside. They slipped inside and sat at the only table. Fang wedged himself between their legs, delighted, until Loren finally pinned him flat on the floor for a full body rub that left the dog rolling happily. Hagrid edged toward the kettle with a gruff sniff. The brew he made was a deep red thing of an unknown sort, and the rock cakes on the plate were, true to their name, as hard and unforgiving as stones. "We came to see you," Harry said quietly, trying for simple. "Ha!" Hagrid scoffed, but didn't look fully cross. He moved to the sink and began peeling potatoes with brisk, unforgiving strokes. Big spuds became little peelings, little spuds became scraps. Harry suspected Hagrid was peeling a little of his own mood into the food and felt a stab of guilt and a small relief that they weren't staying for dinner if the food was in such a mood. "Hagrid," Hermione said, small and earnest, "we wanted to take care of magical creatures again. We do, really, but our timetables are full." "You know how it is. All the time-turners are broken," Ron put in. "And it's not like friendship needs a class to keep going, right?" Loren added lamely. Hagrid kept peeling, occasionally huffing. When he finally wiped his hands on his apron, he sighed, the heavy kind you only get from someone who's been worrying for a long time. "I know your lessons are busy," he said. "Truth is, I haven't been up to teaching much neither." "Why?" Hermione asked. "'Cause Aragog's on his last legs," Hagrid said. The words fell like stones. "He won't make it through winter. He's too old to move, and he can't take a proper bite. I've been feeding him soft giant grubs to keep him going, but—" He stopped and stared at the table, voice ragged. Harry and the others exchanged helpless looks. Giant grubs, huge, protein-rich maggots, the sort of thing you fed to dragons or fledgling beasts, were the only things Hagrid could get Aragog to swallow. They had no sensible comfort to offer. They only patted his shoulder and murmured the small consolations available to them. There was an unpleasant memory threaded through Hagrid's words. Years ago, they had all taken part in an affair that had harmed Aragog. That made this moment ache a little more. Without their interference back then, perhaps the old Acromantula would have had a few more winters left. September 19th was a clear, crisp autumn day. It was the birthday of a certain little witch, but they weren't going to celebrate it behind the closed doors of the Room of Requirement. The weather was already turning, and if they didn't take advantage of the warm afternoons now, cold winds would soon drive everyone back to the fireside. They didn't disturb Hagrid. His hut in the Forbidden Forest wasn't the right place for a party. He was preparing to say a final goodbye to Aragog. They didn't plan to slip off to Hogsmeade either. They'd been plenty of times, and Thursday was almost a full day of classes, with only the afternoon free. So they decided to take a walk. Hermione had already changed into her autumn and winter robes, a heavier wool weave that made them feel thicker. Underneath, she wore a light gray fitted sweater, a Gryffindor red and gold tie, and a pair of khaki boots. Together, the outfit made her look quietly striking. Loren couldn't help but glance at her neck, slender and pale, like cream set in moonlight. For a moment, he only wanted to kiss it. Hermione noticed his gaze and felt it was a little dangerous. She deflected it with a question. Why did Professor Snape sign the textbook as the Half-Blood Prince? His mother was Eileen Prince, Loren said. She was a witch. Snape inherited her talent and her magic, and for family reasons, he chose to acknowledge that side of his lineage. That's why he used the name Half-Blood Prince. He spoke carefully. He didn't want to judge Snape's father. Mixed-blood families rarely fared well in those days, and the signs suggested Tobias Snape might have been violent. Hermione pressed on. You used to dismiss the idea of a resurrection potion. Do you think Snape could revive Harry's mother? He watched death up close. He had his own experience of loss. Loren thought for a few seconds, then both nodded and shook his head. What do you mean? Did you see the notes in the professor's textbook? Even as a student, he was reworking the standard recipes. He was brilliant at potions. Inventing a resurrection potion doesn't seem impossible. He kicked a pebble with the toe of his boot. But resurrection isn't just about the living's wishes. The dead have to agree in a way. Some witches and wizards believe in meeting death with acceptance, treating it as another adventure, and won't be dragged back. In that kind of panic back then, she didn't even stay as a ghost to comfort Harry. After so many years, who knows what she'd want? Hermione nodded thoughtfully, then asked, Why did Snape give the Horcrux to Harry? It's probably part of a ritual, Loren answered. If a soul is to be called back, it needs guidance. If a body is to be shaped, it needs an anchor or a mark. Voldemort used his father's bone, his servant's flesh, and his enemy's blood. Snape might have used something equally personal to anchor whatever he was trying to do. He shrugged. I don't know about the other marks. How's Harry doing lately? Hermione asked. Loren shrugged. The mail-order textbooks came ages ago. He flipped through a few pages and shoved them in the cupboard. That's progress, Hermione said. Who knows? Loren said with a sigh. When you make a mistake in youth and take the wrong path, everything after it can start to look wrong. In the end, you see it can't be undone, and you stubbornly try to force it back. He reached for her hand, rubbing it a few times before lacing their fingers together. Her palm was warm and soft, something steady and comforting in the small chaos of the world. Hermione glanced at him, her eyes brightened slightly. She tightened her grip and gave his hand a gentle swing. Shall we go behind that rock over there? No one'll see us, he suggested. Hermione said nothing as she let him lead her into the sheltered spot. Her face was almost expressionless, perfectly calm. She even joked that she should have gone back to the library to finish her arithmancy homework. Then she thought better of it. First, they'd have to go back to the dormitory so she could swap into a turtleneck. Down in the boys' dormitory, Ron was a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Quidditch tryouts were coming up, and with so many players signed on, as captain, he had to make fair, sensible decisions. When Wood had been captain, Ron had helped. When Angelina had been captain, he'd helped then too. Now it was his turn, and he felt the full weight of choices to make. Angelina Johnson, Alicia Spinnet, and the Weasley twins had all graduated. The team was suddenly half undone. There were a few reserves left, but their skills needed work, and the team's rhythm had to be rebuilt. Demelza Robbins, Jimmy Peaks, Mitch Gutter, he muttered, listing names and trying to picture the 11 he'd want on the pitch. 2 chaser spots and 2 beater spots were up for grabs. No one doubted Ron as keeper, the legendary keeper, in his head, and Katie Bell, a proven chaser, would stay. As for Seeker, Harry, Ron stole a glance at the next bed. Harry had the battered Half-Blood Prince book open on his lap, the margins crowded with frantic, rewritten notes. Harry was peering so closely at the pages, he looked as if he could read the ink through the parchment. Ron muttered, "No wonder he needs glasses." Just then, Harry lifted his wand without a spoken word, and a bright flare flashed from its tip. "Ah, ah, ah!" Ron yelped. I'm sorry. I'll put you down right now," Harry cried, and chaos erupted. By the time Loren had stepped into the room, he found Ron straddling Harry on the bed, punching the quilt and muttering, "So you're good at silent casting, are you? I'll hang you upside down. I'll make you drop." It was a schoolyard scuffle, played out in 4 poster beds. Seamus laughed uproariously as accomplice, while Neville sat on his bed silently reading Transfiguration today, a bemused bystander. Loren sat down and watched, amused, cheering the fight on occasionally, an accomplice by default. "How did they start fighting?" he asked. "Harry found a new spell in that old textbook," someone answered. "And then this." The doorknob turned just then, and every eye went to the door. Dean from the next dorm pushed it open, still wearing the slightly stunned expression he always had when something exciting happened. He glanced at Ron's fist, then cleared his throat. "I met Headmaster Dumbledore on my way up. He asked me to give Harry a note. You guys carry on." He handed the note to Loren and waited to close the door. Loren skimmed it quickly. "Dear Harry, how is the matter I asked you about progressing? Saturday would be a good time. Please come to my office at 8 o'clock in the evening. I have some clues worth sharing. I hope you had a very pleasant first week of term. Your faithful, Albus Dumbledore." Because tomorrow was Friday, the evening felt relaxed. Professor Sprout's herbology class wasn't until noon, and after Ron had finally calmed down, the roommates spent a long time joking and playing until lights out. Harry quietly repeated the meeting time and place to himself a few times, scribbled it onto a slip of paper, and tucked it into the Half-Blood Prince's textbook. Getting close to Professor Slughorn had been a long-term plan. Last semester, he'd been buried in exams, and although he'd been invited to Slughorn's gatherings, he hadn't been able to contribute to the potions conversation, only to enjoy the food. He'd made almost no headway socially, and the idea of broaching Horcruxes with Slughorn had been out of the question. This semester was different. His work in potions had been excellent, and Slughorn was warming to him. Harry felt a breakthrough might be coming. Tom Riddle as a student, the secrets of Horcruxes, the role Slughorn had once played. He set the old textbook on his bedside table, shut his eyes, and a jumble of strange thoughts drifted through his mind. He didn't know how long it took for his thoughts to slow. His last conscious impression was that the wind outside had died down. He fell into a deep sleep. In the darkened dormitory, a single candle guttered away, its weak yellow light trembling. Without a breeze, the old textbook on Harry's pillow flipped open. The pages turned on their own until they paused on a page describing the fainting fit. The ink on that page faded as a faint white glow rose from the paper. Harry, lost in sleep, rolled over with a soft smack of his lips and, without waking, let one hand fall naturally onto the page. He mumbled in his sleep and slipped into a dream. It was the 3rd Friday in September. There was only one herbology lesson that morning. The sixth years gathered outside the greenhouse, some stamping mud from their boots, some peering through the crack of the door, some clutching their textbooks and chatting quietly. This term's book was the Comprehensive Guide to Carnivorous Trees, which sounded dangerous and, to the sixth years, all the more thrilling for it. Not long after, Professor Sprout bustled up in her usual brown gardening robes, short and sturdy, and looking younger than her name might suggest. Neville handed his textbook to Hannah and went over to greet her. As one of the few students with top marks in herbology, he was now Sprout's assistant. During careers advice the previous year, Professor McGonagall had suggested he stay on at Hogwarts, assist for 2 years, then eventually take over the subject. Neville had been tempted, but his Gran wanted him to be an Auror. Rumor had it that Gran Longbottom had even been scolded by McGonagall in a letter, but Neville wouldn't say more, not even to Hannah. Neville took the key, opened the greenhouse, and laid out the class materials: shears, trowels, protective goggles, rubber gloves, ceramic bowls. Professor Sprout turned to face the students, smiling. "Good morning. This term we'll be studying an important specimen, the gnarled vine. Can anyone tell me the characteristics of the gnarled vine? Miss Granger already explained it in great detail. I have nothing to add. House points to Gryffindor. 5, Sprout said with a wink. You're sixth years, so I don't need to go over basic greenhouse etiquette again. Now inside, so you can observe the gnarled vine up close." The lesson moved into practical observation. Students formed groups and examined the vine's shape, color, preferred environment, physiological quirks, and behavior. The sixth years were practiced at this. Barring surprises, the homework would be an observation report, roughly 10 inches long. As usual, Loren's group of 4 clustered around the knotted remains of a gnarled vine. Hermione took careful notes while the others chatted. "Did you sleep well last night?" Harry asked, fastening his protective goggles, a little awkwardly. Loren looked surprised. "Harry, we've known each other 6 years. Do you have to start small talk like that?" I had a strange dream," Harry said. Ron's eyes widened behind his goggles. Hermione straightened and looked at him, suddenly serious. "Did you dream about Lord Voldemort again?" No, nothing like that." Harry shook his head. After a moment, he lowered his voice. "I dreamt about my mum and Aunt Petunia. It was a blur, but it seemed like they were chasing each other by a river when they were young." "Don't worry about it. Dreaming about relatives is normal," Ron said casually. "I dream about my mum every term. Once I even dreamt about Mum and Dad dating, and them getting caught by Filch in the courtyard. Funny, because Filch wasn't the caretaker back then." "Right." Loren and Hermione exchanged a look, and then bent back over the vine roots. The tangle of roots was covered in bumps and tentacle-like thorns that prickled to the touch. The pods on the branches were close to bursting, fat with restless seeds. The sketch for the observation report would be tricky. Saturday evening. "Sour pop," Harry said, reading the password from his note to the stone gargoyle. With a rumble, the wall behind it slid aside, revealing a spiral staircase. He stepped on. The staircase unwound itself and carried him up to the oak door with the brass knocker. "Knock, knock, knock! Come in. Good evening, Professor." "Ah, good evening, Harry." Dumbledore sat smiling behind his desk. The office was as always, delicate silver ornaments, portraits of former heads of school, and a dozing fox. The Pensieve sat on the desk, its silvery white mist drifting lazily like clouds over a lake. Harry knew the Pensieve well. He'd seen memories extracted there before. Karkaroff's trial, Hokey the house elf's recollection of Tom Riddle murdering Hepzibah Smith, and how Tom had appropriated Hufflepuff's cup and Slytherin's locket. Harry asked the question that had been on his mind. "Professor, have you managed to get Slughorn's memory about the Horcruxes?" "No," Dumbledore said. "Horace is very wary of me." "Then whose memory are we going into? What are we going to see?" "It's not exactly a secret," Dumbledore said, and his expression drifted as he remembered exploring the Gaunt family home with Loren a few years ago. He shook himself and looked back at Harry. "I think you should see these things with your own eyes to understand the story from back then properly." "What story?" Harry asked. "Come," Dumbledore said. "Let's take a walk down the path outside Hangleton." The observation record for the gnarled knotweed had been a group effort. Hermione was clearly the lead. She meticulously described the greenhouse's growth conditions for the plant, compared it to the textbook specimens, analyzed why various traits differed, dissected how geography and the greenhouse environment might be influencing it, and hypothesized that other crops in the greenhouse could be factors as well. Her first draft alone filled 2 feet of parchment. Loren, listed as the second author, examined how the knotweed's change in shape affected its medicinal properties and internal magic, speculated on application scenarios tying in potions and alchemy, and emphasized the plant's economic value and potential products, about a foot of parchment. Harry and Ron were co-third authors. They handled the drawings and the final assembly and transcription. The illustrations, copied from the real plant and photographs, broke the knotweed down into roots, stems, leaves, and 15 specific features: tendrils, knots, fruits, seeds. For complex patterns, they cross-referenced the textbook and other classmates' work. It was a lot of paperwork, but the boys enjoyed the straightforward physical tasks. The finished manuscript was submitted a week later. Today was the second herbology class on the gnarled knotweed. The pods, only partly ripe last week, had completely matured. Professor Sprout held a freshly extracted pod in one hand and called out, "Groups, harvest the plants you're responsible for. No strict requirements on fruit harvest. Whoever brings back the fewest injuries and the least severe gets a reward." The pod in her hand was revolting, grapefruit-sized, pulsing, its skin slick with sticky juice, veins swollen and throbbing. It looked like something the Care of Magical Creatures class could use as a teaching aid. Good grief. Advanced classes really are different from the earlier years, Loren muttered. If you didn't know better, you'd think this was Defense Against the Dark Arts, not herbology. The 4 of them moved toward a scarred, gnarled knotweed. Compared to last week, the root tendrils were much thicker, and a faint, slimy, squirming noise came from the pods. Hermione started fitting on protective gloves. The usual dragonhide gloves were too thick and clumsy. For this class, they used gum leather gloves, elastic, more like a surgeon's rubber gloves. According to Professor Sprout, Headmaster Dumbledore keeps a tight rein on her lessons, Hermione said, snapping the gloves in place. There shouldn't be any real danger. Harry wore 2 layers of spectacles, his own lenses and protective goggles, so the glasses pressed into the bridge of his nose. "Speaking of Dumbledore," he said quietly as he reached toward a pod, "I went to his office last week. He showed me Bob Ogden's memory. He told them briefly about the Pensieve, Ogden at the Gaunt home to deliver a summons, and Marvolo and Morfin's malicious attack on ministry officials and the way Merope was treated. He said it was to help me understand Lord Voldemort's past," Harry finished, "but it left me feeling odd. The headmaster's told me some of that before, but he's never shown me the memories," Hermione said. "So Dumbledore told me to call you next time, too." Harry sounded like he'd been given instructions. "Tomorrow night." Harry slid his gloved hand into a pod. Thorny tendrils waved like an angry cat, vibrating as if warning off anyone who came near. Loren read Harry's tension and gently patted him, signaling him to step aside. With one hand, he soothed the main vine's scarred surface until it stilled. With the other, he reached in, eased out a pod like the one Professor Sprout held, and handed it into the bowl Ron offered. A quick, practiced flick of his finger produced an invisible, razor-sharp edge that sliced the pulsing fruit open. The bowl filled with sticky, writhing, green, caterpillar-like seeds, the first pod done. They stood up and breathed out, feeling a little lighter. Around them, other groups were chaos. Parvati next to them had a wrist punctured and was screaming. Neville's group had managed to extract a pod, but couldn't get through the tough skin. Justin's frustrated swing with a small trowel shattered a ceramic bowl and sent pods bouncing everywhere. The girls shrieked at the sight of the wriggling seed mass. Witches generally had less tolerance for slimy things, and Hermione was no exception. She quietly shifted 2 steps behind Loren, brow knitting. There was no awkwardness. That was just how they divided the work. Hermione handled the thinking and analysis, while the boys did the messy manual labor. For the rest of the class, they worked smoothly, emptying pod after pod, while the thorny vines obediently retracted. The scarred plants lay quiet and inert, looking almost normal. That night, the moon was bright, and the stars thinned. The Felix Felicis in the cauldron absorbed the full moon magic. Under silvered moonlight, it flowed like liquid light. Loren stood at the head of the narrow potions table, wand in his right hand, guiding the shimmering magic and watching the brew. Rue powder scattered across the surface sent tiny ripples through the green, and emerald sparks danced like a tranquil starfield. Every previous step of the recipe had gone right, all ingredients had fully reacted, and the ambient magic had harmonized. Only the final step remained. Loren withdrew the light from his wand and looked over at Professor Slughorn. The man's face was full of anticipation and worry at once. "Professor, may I finish the final step?" Loren asked. Slughorn's smile faltered. He struggled with himself, muttering, "Your grades in potions are excellent, Loren, and your charms are, well, Phileas and Albus both think highly of you." He sounded like he was trying to persuade himself as much as Loren. Part of him didn't want to hand over a cauldron on the brink of completion, and another part trusted the boy. All right, Slughorn said at last, shoulders dropping. "This cauldron of Felix Felicis wouldn't have been possible without you. An old man like me won't last 6 months at that level. At worst, we start over next month." He averted his gaze as if afraid to watch too closely. "Go on, then." Loren couldn't help smiling at the professor's childlike fussing. He waved his wand in an exact pattern 8 times and spoke steadily, "Felix Empra." The still potion leapt into life. The silver-green liquid boiled and churned, rearranging itself, and then the cauldron's contents transformed into molten gold. Large droplets danced like golden fish across the surface, leaping and falling without a single one spilling over. 6:45. How can they be so similar? Golden in color, shimmering and radiant. This is top-quality Felix Felicis. We brewed at just the right time, the night of the year's fullest moon. By last Christmas prices, a bottle this size is worth at least 500 galleons, 12 of them. Merlin's beard. Slughorn bottled the potion with obvious delight. The liquid flowed like molten gold into crystal-clear glass, each vial catching the light and sparkling. Anyone could see how valuable it was. As he finished, he began to consider distribution. Ashwinder eggs, wasabi, sea onion, he had procured every ingredient, provided the cauldron, even the bottles. On the surface, he had every right to claim credit, but he knew very well that the brew had succeeded because of a student who had shortened the brewing time and smoothed the process. Compared to the precious time turner that made that possible, the ingredients were trivial. The bottles were arranged in neat rows, their golden glow flickering like a regimented line of candles. Loren waited quietly at Slughorn's side, smiling gently, polite as ever. "Have I ever told you you remind me of a student I once taught?" Slughorn said. "No, Professor," Loren replied. Slughorn watched him for a moment, then reached out to straighten the vials. His round face clouded with a mixture of worry and reluctance. "I know many students think me a bit of a snob, but you needn't fear, Loren. I'm old enough not to take advantage of you. You're not a bad person, Professor." "Nor am I entirely good," Slughorn returned with a chuckle, and then pushed 8 bottles toward him. The glass bottoms scraped the table with a satisfying sound. "Here, child, you've earned these." Loren smiled and declined 2, taking only 6. "I think 6 is enough, Professor." Slughorn looked at the 2 remaining vials, then at Loren as if trying to memorize him. Black hair, dark eyes, handsome features, pale skin, a calm, unassuming manner, no hint of arrogance, neither aggressive nor aloof. Polite and quiet, gifted in several subjects, restrained and courteous. Not only his face, but the whole impression of being with him spoke of exceptional talent, academically brilliant, thoughtful, witty, a natural leader. From the moment he first met Loren last term, Slughorn had felt it. He compared him in his mind to others, the celebrated Potter, the brilliant Granger, even the occasionally humbled Malfoy or not. Each had their strengths and obvious flaws. Loren was different. He took an interest in Slughorn's dinners even if he might not wholly approve of them, picked up conversational bait effortlessly, and would pass it along with a light joke. Every teacher who had met him privately had come away impressed. From the stern McGonagall to the gentle Flitwick, even the divination professor. So similar, Slughorn thought. So terribly similar. He could not understand why someone like this had been placed in Gryffindor rather than Slytherin. The Sorting Hat must have been in an odd mood. Time had revealed a few small differences between Loren and Tom, ways Loren showed his Gryffindor side. Laziness with homework, teasing friends, preparing Easter gifts for the house elves, chatting easily with Hagrid. Sometimes he acted like a typical Gryffindor. Sometimes he even fell in love. All of it made him oddly human. "You're truly outstanding," Slughorn said, unable to help himself. "Thank you for the praise," Loren replied. Hiss. The involuntary exhale left Slughorn with a little shiver, that exact tilt of a smile, humble yet unsettling in its precision. He accepted the bottles with mixed feelings, found a chair, poured himself more tea, and adopted a more serious tone. "I can't help with everything, but there are a few things you should know about Felix Felicis. Every potions textbook warns that excessive consumption brings side effects: dizziness, cognitive dissonance, irritability, delusions, megalomania. A more serious danger is addiction," he added. Addiction. Addiction. Loren tilted his head, surprised. He had never heard of that. "That's right, similar to Muggle substances," Slughorn said solemnly. "Felix Felicis grants you 12 hours of extraordinary luck. That tangible stream of good fortune makes you euphoric. When you return to ordinary life, you feel lost and depressed and may crave that state again." "I see," Loren considered the advice. "My suggestion would be to resell the potion or deposit it in Gringotts. Only use it for genuinely important occasions." "I understand, Professor." Loren left Slughorn's office with the bottles under his arm, thoughtful. He walked down to the library on Saturday, hunting through tomes for records about Felix Felicis. Hermione sat by the window working on an ancient runes translation. She was completely absorbed, a pristine white quill scratching the page, occasionally turning a textbook with a delicate hand. When she came to a difficult passage, her brow would crease, her long lashes fluttering. Sunlight lit the spread of her book and warmed her fair features, making her nose bridge seem especially fine and even her pursed lips attractive. They were, undeniably, a pleasing pair to the eye. A soft sound announced Madame Pince's approach. Loren and Hermione looked up and saw the librarian lean in to whisper something to the young witch. "Okay, I understand. Thank you, Madame Pince," Hermione murmured, then gave Loren a quick look and slipped out of the library. Loren glanced at the open book and the uncapped ink bottle she had left behind. She intended to return. He went back to what he was reading, Zygmunt Bode's recollections of student life, and soon Hermione reappeared, looking slightly bewildered. She carried 2 small glass bottles, one in each hand, golden and gleaming. Loren still had 6 of those tiny glass bottles tucked away in the compartment of his Slytherin locket. If there were no other potions masters at the school, and no one else who had mastered time magic, then these 2 bottles of Felix Felicis had to be the ones Slughorn himself had brewed and seen bottled last night. Hermione moved back to her usual seat and handed one of the bottles to Loren. "Professor Slughorn gave them to me. One is for you, and one is for me. He said it was a reward for the first potions class, the one he promised us." Loren found the retired teacher amusing. He'd expected the matter to be settled after last night's negotiations, but it seemed Slughorn had been holding something back. Since neither side had lost anything, Loren didn't pry and accepted the Felix Felicis with a small, amused chuckle. "Professor Slughorn is entertaining. He likes his comforts, but he isn't stingy with the things he gives away." Hermione nodded. "He favors members of his club, but he doesn't overlook other students for it. He's a good professor, all his flaws included." "He was looking at me oddly, though." Hermione glanced toward Madame Pince by the shelves, pursed her lips, and returned to her quill and ink, picking up the translation she'd left unfinished. Loren lowered his head over his book, deliberately adopting a focused expression. When the librarian's gaze drifted away, he spoke in a whisper, lips barely moving. "The dose in a bottle is enough for several uses. Don't take it continuously. There's a risk of dependency." "Don't worry," Hermione said. "What would you even use Felix Felicis for at Hogwarts?" "Finals," he supplied. "No." She stopped, then looked up and found him staring at her, his expression oddly intense. She felt her neck tighten. She'd only been thinking the thought, not acting on it. By 7:30, the moon was high and full. After dinner, they lingered in the common room for a while. When it was time, Loren and Harry slipped through the portrait hole toward the headmaster's office for their appointment with Dumbledore. It wasn't yet lights out. They walked side by side down the corridor, passing familiar scenes. Gryffindors running and laughing, Hufflepuffs taking a rooftop picnic with blankets and food, the occasional Ravenclaw exploring the castle. Slytherins were scarce. Portraits whispered from their frames, and translucent figures drifted out from the walls. Spades 2, conflict, a faint, ethereal female voice murmured. Spades 7, ominous sign, another voice replied. Loren slowed. Do you hear that? No, I don't think so. A black-robed woman suddenly hurried out from around a corner. Her face was gaunt, etched with worry and indignation. Her wide eyes rolled occasionally. Professor Trelawney reeked faintly of sherry, shuffling a stained deck of cards as she muttered the meanings to herself. Spades 10, violence, jack of spades, a young man with black hair. Oh, that's wrong. Loren and Harry watched her retreating form without surprise. Since Firenze the Centaur had joined as another divination teacher, Trelawney had become jittery and paranoid, convinced McGonagall wanted her gone. The students often saw her pestering Dumbledore for reassurance. Harry glanced away and hesitated before asking, Loren, do you know anything about interpreting dreams? I took divination, Loren said. I know, but Ron and I never paid attention. I slept more soundly than you in class. At least you read the books, Harry said. But instead of asking you, I should ask Professor Trelawney. She'd definitely interpret my dream. She'd probably make it sound ominous either way. If you're lucky, it's a fall. If you're unlucky, it's death. Loren shrugged. I don't interpret dreams professionally, but I can listen. Dreams, most of them fade when you wake up. Only a few hang on clearly. Harry looked down the empty corridor, gentleness in his eyes. Mine started the night I hung Ron upside down. Since then, I've dreamed every night. I keep seeing my mother when she was young, how close she was to Aunt Petunia, how she showed magic, how she got her Hogwarts letter. He shook his head, smiling faintly. The Evans family was so happy then that Aunt Petunia wasn't always against magic. She even envied Lily. It's strange. I'm actually glad to see my mother in my dreams every night. Loren said nothing. He understood. Harry didn't need a formal interpretation so much as someone to listen. At 8 o'clock, they reached the headmaster's office, knocked, and entered. Dumbledore sat behind his desk, smiling and motioning them to sit. You both remember the Gaunt family's story, I suppose. Marvolo and his son Gaunt were imprisoned. Merope married that handsome muggle and was abandoned. She ended up alone in London, selling Slytherin's locket for 10 galleons, carrying her child, and choosing death on the night she gave birth. Loren's mind slid back to that weekend in his second year when Dumbledore had taken him to Little Hangleton and told him Merope's story outside the Gaunt house. Moonlight filtered through the office as Dumbledore tapped his wand to his temple, pulled a ribbon of silver memory from himself, laid it into the pensieve, and swirled it. Tonight's moon is apt for travel. We will go back 60 years to meet the child who would become Lord Voldemort. Harry, having used the pensieve before, didn't ask any more and stepped in. Loren glanced once at the old headmaster, then bent and fell into the cold, swirling depths of the pensieve. There was the familiar sensation of falling, a few weightless seconds, then his feet found the ground, and he opened his eyes to an old-fashioned, bustling street. Dumbledore stood nearby, noticeably younger, his beard and hair long but not yet white, a warm auburn, wearing a refined purple velvet suit. He crossed the road in front of a carriage and walked with purpose. What beautiful clothes, Professor, Harry murmured. What a fine beard, Professor, Loren added. Dumbledore chuckled and beckoned them to follow. They walked a short distance, passed through a high iron gate, and entered a bare, hard courtyard. Beyond it stood a gloomy, enclosed building ringed with high railings. A copper plaque was nailed to the door, Wool's Orphanage, 647. Mrs. Cole, bring the iodine upstairs to Martha. Billy Stubbs has picked at his scabs again. Eric Wallace's chickenpox needs treating on schedule. That child scratched himself bloody and dirtied the sheets. And don't let any other children wander in. Containing the chickenpox is the highest priority right now. Mrs. Cole was not a woman to be trifled with. Her orders were barked with a stern face that left no room for argument. She moved quickly along the hall of black and white tiles, eyes sweeping every old, narrow room to make sure each corner was neat and clean. When she reached the door where Dumbledore waited, she looked him over as if judging him by sight alone. She wore an apron like the other carers, but it did nothing to soften her sharp, gaunt features. Her cheekbones jutted, her eyes were hard to meet, and every movement had the hint of someone perpetually on edge. In a corner, 3 figures stood silent, wrapped in their own memories. Harry turned his head away from Mrs. Cole, even though he knew she could not see him. "Can such a supervisor really take good care of these children?" he murmured. "The orphanage's finances are very tight," Loren said quietly. "The government's Muggle aid and donations from churches and charities barely cover the basics. As a supervisor, a cold manner and an iron hand are often the only things that keep a place like this running." Harry fell silent. Dumbledore slipped an arm around Loren's shoulders and patted him once, saying nothing. Loren watched Mrs. Cole with a new, sympathetic understanding. Her strictness was not the same as Professor McGonagall's or Professor Snape's. She looked worn out. Rather than fierce, she seemed exhausted, burdened by tasks that left her barely room to breathe. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Cole. My name is Albus Dumbledore," the young man said softly, a gentle smile that was hard not to like. "I wrote you a letter requesting an appointment, and you very kindly invited me to come today." Mrs. Cole narrowed her eyes and inspected him. After a few moments, she nodded. "Oh, yes, I remember. Let's talk in the office." "Of course, Mrs. Cole." They went inside. The little office had the same simple, threadbare look as the rest of the orphanage, half living room, half office, furniture scuffed and mismatched, clearly gathered from donations. Mrs. Cole motioned for Dumbledore to sit on a wobbly chair and took her place behind a cluttered desk, still looking slightly uneasy. "You said the purpose was in the letter," she said. "You're here about Tom Riddle?" "Yes. I'm a teacher. I've come to discuss Tom's future and to arrange for him to study at our school." "Are you a relative?" "No, I'm a professor. I'm here to invite Tom to Hogwarts." "Hogwarts?" She said the name with suspicion. "And why take an interest in Tom?" "We believe he has qualities we look for in our students." "So you're offering him a place, a scholarship? How can that be? He never applied." Mrs. Cole was shrewd. As supervisor, she was used to sniffing out inconsistencies and half-truths. A school she had never heard of. A strange professor claiming to know a child. It all begged explanation. Dumbledore, sensing her mistrust, reached into the air for a pragmatic solution. When his answers faltered, he drew his wand and made a small, discreet movement. Loren and Harry watched helplessly. They knew, even if they weren't as familiar with the letter of the law as Hermione might be, that using magic on a Muggle was supposed to be forbidden. The wand waved at a Muggle woman, and for a moment it felt like a breach of something serious. Dumbledore blinked and chuckled softly. A little trick for dealing with Muggle paperwork, confundo, and perhaps a touch of gin. The combination worked with unnerving efficiency. Blank sheets shimmered into proper documents under the effect of confundo, and the sudden appearance of a small bottle of gin seemed to put Mrs. Cole completely at ease. She drank, and her features softened. 2 red patches bloomed on her cheekbones, and her sharpness melted into fumbling concern for the child. "I want to know about Tom's background," Dumbledore asked gently. "Was he born here?" Mrs. Cole settled back, glass in hand, and began to tell the story in a voice that wavered between tiredness and the lingering steadiness of someone used to repeating the tale. "It was New Year's Eve, a night of terrible weather, snow everywhere, freezing. A girl, not much older than I am now, mind you, I'd only just started, staggered up the front steps. We brought her in, and within the hour she gave birth. She told us the boy's surname was Riddle. She said she'd taken Marvolo as a middle name from her grandfather and named the baby Tom after the man she said was his father. She hoped the child would look like him. And then she died." Mrs. Cole's voice broke a little, and the gin made her confessions less guarded. She'd pinned everything on that child, but nobody from the Riddle family came asking for him. No one named Tom or Marvolo turned up. No relatives claimed him, so he stayed. Only after Dumbledore repeatedly assured her that Hogwarts would take Tom did she relax fully and begin to speak of the boy himself. "He's a peculiar child," she said. "Strange, even as a baby. He hardly cried. As he grew, he became odd in ways that made you uneasy. He likes to bully, but it's the kind of thing that's awkward to catch. There have been accidents, or perhaps malicious incidents. She rubbed her hands together, as though trying to smooth down the memory. Billy Stubbs's rabbit was found hanging from the rafters. Tom said he hadn't done it. I wanted to believe him. Still, rabbits don't just hang themselves. And once, after a trip to the seaside, Amy Benson and Dennis Bishop came back different. When we asked what had happened, they only said they had gone into a cave with Tom Riddle. Mrs. Cole frowned at the memory, then sighed. The drink in her hand trembled slightly as she took another swallow, and the room settled into a heavy silence, save for the muffled bustle of the orphanage beyond the door. Chapter 647, 11-year-old Tom Riddle. The late summer of 1937 was a wet, miserable stretch, worse than any summer Tom Riddle had spent at Wool's orphanage. The constant rain cut short the time Mrs. Cole allowed the children outdoors, and trapped inside the cramped rooms he found little to enjoy. He had never cared for football or rugby. To him, most games were mindless noise made by crowds of fools. What he loved was the look on a weak child's face when they found they were afraid of him, pale, trembling, stumbling over words. That terror was a performance more satisfying and subtle than any film Mrs. Cole rented. Indoors, with caretakers moving about and Mrs. Cole checking the rooms, opportunities were limited. He stole small treasures and listened to the muffled cries through the walls. The sound gave him comfort. When had this started? Perhaps when he hung Billy Stubbs' ridiculous toy rabbit from the rafters. He had meant to hang Billy himself, which would have been more entertaining. Perhaps it was that day by the sea when he led Dennis Bishop and Amy Benson into a cave and held their heads under the water. Their wails, raw, hopeless, had been like music. All of it relied on his secret gift. Tom Riddle had discovered long ago that he could move objects with his mind, make animals obey, and use that same ability to hurt other orphans. He doesn't get on with the others. No, not at all. Mrs. Cole murmured as she climbed the stone staircase, finally stopping at the first door down the third-floor corridor. After 2 soft knocks, she pushed it open. "Tom, someone's come to see you." The room was bare and undecorated, an old wardrobe, a wooden chair, and an iron bed, all clearly donated. From the viewpoint of the memory watchers, Loren and the 2 others, they saw the boy, 11-year-old Tom Riddle. Merope would have been pleased to see him now. He had his father's handsome features. He was a touch taller than his peers, dark-haired and fair-skinned, but a heavy shadow clung to him. He narrowed his eyes at the oddly dressed visitor, his voice rough with caution. "Are you a doctor?" "No, I am a professor." "I don't believe you. She said I needed to see a doctor. They all say I'm different. Perhaps they are right. I am not mad. Hogwarts is not an asylum. Hogwarts is a school of magic." 11-year-old Tom was unnervingly mature. He was composed, guarded in his words, until the young Professor Dumbledore showed him something of magic. Flames sprang up from nothing and wrapped around the old wardrobe. The wardrobe held everything Tom owned. Seeing it engulfed, he lost his composure completely, screaming in terror and fury. He lunged at the strange man, but the flames vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. The wardrobe was undamaged, yet the small stolen items Tom had hidden inside were exposed. He stared, awestruck. He smoothed his sharp edges and became almost polite, peppering the professor with questions about wands, spells, and wizards. Dumbledore had already glimpsed the small black things beneath that outward civility. His tone stayed gentle, but his manner grew firm. "Hogwarts does not permit stealing. There you will learn not only to use magic, but to control it." "Yes, sir." Tom sensed the rejection. He declined the offer of an escort to Diagon Alley, arranged where to meet at term start, and entrusted the matters that needed setting in order. As Dumbledore prepared to leave, Tom watched his retreating figure. In that moment, he seemed to sense an ending, the rainy summer of 1937 ending, the first 11 years of his dull, dark life ending. A new world was opening, strange, vibrant, full of colors and wonders. Softly, almost to himself, Tom asked, "I can speak to snakes. Is that normal for a wizard?" With that question, the memory blurred, like ink dissolving in water. Loren and the others felt the scene recede, and in an instant they were back in the headmaster's office. Fawkes fixed them with solemn, dark eyes. Dumbledore sat behind his desk, eyelids half closed as if recalling far-off things, or simply resting. Loren steadied himself, shaking off the vertigo of the sudden shift. Harry said nothing. 11-year-old Tom Riddle had been remarkable, already able to manage his strange magic, composed in the presence of a professor, and confident enough to insist on going to Diagon Alley alone. It was no surprise the man would later be honored for his contributions to the school. "Did Riddle wait until the last moment to mention Parseltongue to try to impress you?" Loren asked. "I think so." Dumbledore opened his eyes and chuckled softly. But Parseltongue wasn't as surprising as he expected. "After all, we have one among us now, don't we?" "You didn't know Harry then. Were you really not surprised?" Loren pressed. Dumbledore looked at him quietly for a moment, then inclined his head. "Of course I was surprised, but I did not let him see it." "Heh!" Loren smiled. "And after that, how did he do once he was at school?" "He did exceptionally well, especially in the early years. Even I could find little to fault." Dumbledore took a sip of tea, memories surfacing. At Hogwarts, Tom Riddle's talents shone. He was insatiably curious, polite to professors, helpful to other students, and he formed good relationships with nearly everyone, except me. During his years here, he gathered a group of devoted followers. Followers isn't the right word. Associates, perhaps. Not servants, for he concealed any contempt. Not friends. He had no real affection for them. They became a force that dominated Hogwarts for years. Even after he graduated, their influence continued. They were a complicated mix, the weak seeking protection, the ambitious seeking prestige, and the cruel, drawn to a leader who would teach them higher forms of cruelty. They were the predecessors of the Death Eaters. 649, Ring and Gemstone Riddle had always been obsessed with his origins. He spent hours in the trophy room, the prefect lists in the school archives, and the history of magic stacks, looking for traces of his father, old Tom Riddle. Of course, he found nothing. In the end, he had to face the truth. His father had been a muggle who had never set foot in Hogwarts. He came to loathe the name Riddle and reinvented himself as Lord Voldemort. A great deal happened in the years that followed. He never stopped trying to work out who he was. From his middle name, Marvolo, he tracked down the Gaunt family, learned he was descended from Salazar Slytherin, and took pride in it. With his cunning, he uncovered the Chamber of Secrets, awakened the basilisk, and by accident, killed Myrtle. You know the rest from your second year. He framed Hagrid and made his first Horcrux, a diary sold at a newsstand on Vauxhall Road. That summer, when he was 16, he didn't return to the orphanage. He went to Little Hangleton to find the Gaunts, murdered the Riddles, blamed Morphin Gaunt, and made his second Horcrux, the Gaunt family ring. Dumbledore studied Harry the way a professor tests a student, then changed his tone. "Harry, you've faced Lord Voldemort in person more than once, and you've learned certain things about him. What do you make of him?" Harry fumbled for an answer. He hated his mother at first and admired a father he never knew. When he learned the truth, he clung to being Slytherin-born. He's hypocritical. He wants to be of noble blood." "That's right," Dumbledore said. "He wants to be exceptional, remote, independent, famous. He despises emotional ties and anything that makes him ordinary. He even abandoned his own name to become someone different." Loren glanced between Dumbledore and Harry and fell silent. "Did you two mean the same thing?" he thought. Dumbledore smiled without noticing the look. "What about other traits?" Dumbledore pressed. "Have you noticed his personality?" Harry answered haltingly. "He's cruel and violent. He ruined other people's lives even as a student, Myrtle, then the Riddle family." "Not violent so much as indifferent," Dumbledore corrected gently. "He dismisses the lives of others as though they don't matter. Classmates, relatives, unless they serve him. He was born of lies and deception. There is no love or compassion in him. At the orphanage, I felt unsettled, not because of his Parseltongue, but because of the cold, dominating cruelty he displayed." "I hope you can find weaknesses in that character," Dumbledore continued. "For example, his overweening confidence, arrogance. He refuses help, won't form bonds, insists on doing everything himself. The adult Voldemort is the same. Many Death Eaters claim they have his trust, that they can approach him, even understand him." Dumbledore's smile carried a touch of irony. "It's all a deception. He's never had friends, and I doubt he ever wanted them." He took a sip of tea and looked at the other student at the table. "And you, Loren, what have you observed about Lord Voldemort?" Loren swallowed a biscuit, licked his lips, and answered cautiously, "He collects things?" Harry was surprised. He hadn't expected that to be called out as a trait, but Dumbledore's face brightened. He laughed, clearly delighted. "Exactly. Tom Riddle is like a magpie. He hoards objects, the box of stolen goods from his wardrobe, the gaunt ring, Ravenclaw's diadem, Hufflepuff's cup, Slytherin's locket, and the sword of Gryffindor he coveted but could not claim. We have reason to believe he would choose such special, commemorative items as Horcruxes. Our task is to find and destroy them one by one so that Voldemort can be destroyed once and for all." Dumbledore's expression turned serious as he looked at Loren. "I'm going to ask something of you." "Now?" Loren's eyes widened. Dumbledore was referring to the Gaunt family ring. 3 years ago, during the visit to the Gaunt home, the headmaster had almost been cursed, too tempted by the ring's hold, and had decided to keep it safe until it could be destroyed. He had entrusted it to Loren for that purpose. Dumbledore nodded. Loren reached up to the pendant at his throat, took it off, and set it on the table. From it he produced a perfect black sphere, smooth as polished stone. Dumbledore tapped the sphere with his wand. Golden light traced a pattern across its surface, an alchemical array Harry didn't understand. The black shell peeled away in concentric layers like an onion, revealing the ring inside. The ring was large. Its band was a dull yellow metal, more like brass than gold, dulled by years and the influence of a fragment of Voldemort's soul. The craftsmanship was crude, not the work of a master jeweler, and it felt wrong for Slytherin's noble lineage. A dark, dense magic clung to the inside of the band. It gave off an unmistakable sense of menace. A heavy black gemstone set into the face of the ring was cracked and unrefined, with no decorative carving. Shallowly engraved on the stone was a symbol, a triangle enclosing a circle, bisected by a vertical line, the simple mark of the Deathly Hallows. Dumbledore's eyes flickered away for a few seconds. Then he recovered his composure. Harry, naturally, did not recognize the significance. He had no idea this was the Resurrection Stone. If Professor Snape had been present, who knew what emotion might have passed across his face? Loren's thoughts wandered in all directions, but he wasn't particularly worried. The last time at the Gaunt house, he had been caught unprepared. This time, he was in the headmaster's office. If something went wrong with the ring, he could always reach into the sorting hat for the sword of Gryffindor. And if worse came to worst, he could destroy it with fiendfire, though he made a mental note to be careful not to set the Resurrection Stone alight or scorch the principal's beard. Fiendfire spat from the wand tip, braided tendrils of flame curling around the golden ring like venomous tentacles, or fresh shoots in spring. The ring shuddered, sensing danger. The dark magic and the soul fragments it contained coalesced into a visible black mist that billowed through the headmaster's office. The portraits on the walls clustered together in alarm. Black, an old Slytherin headmaster, cursed and wrenched with grief. The others stared, stunned. This was an evil none of them had imagined. From the mist, the handsome face of Tom Riddle at 17 faintly took shape and let out a high, shrill shriek. "Dumbledore! Dumbledore!" Harry clenched his teeth, pupils narrowing as if he wanted to burn this image into his memory. Loren watched more carefully, noting how the cursed surface inside the ring had already been burned into wisps of black smoke by the fiendfire. Dumbledore's control was precise. Under his command, the fiendfire clung to the ring, coiling and contracting until the metal glowed red and disintegrated before it could melt. The screams and curses that had echoed through the office died away. Fawkes the Phoenix had hidden under the sorting hat, but the bird still lifted its head to keep a wary eye on a cracked black gemstone. Harry saw it too. The band of the ring lay in scattered ash, but the gem was entirely intact. A triangular eye had been carved on its face, a symbol that made something click in Harry's chest. "It's the symbol of the Deathly Hallows," Dumbledore said, reading his confusion. "The outer triangle represents the invisibility cloak, the circle in the center, the Resurrection Stone." Harry remembered Hermione's words about the Resurrection Stone. His breath quickened, his gaze grew fervent. Loren sat beside them, calmly sipping tea and nibbling the headmaster's office biscuits, far better than anything from the trolley. "I imagine you've heard the tale of the Peverell brothers," Dumbledore continued. The second brother used the resurrection stone to summon his wife back from the dead. He let the rest hang. There were many versions of the tale of the three brothers, but the ending was the same. Cadmus Peveril, haunted by what he had brought back, lived in such torment that he took his own life. Dumbledore met Harry's eyes and spoke softly. Just as your invisibility cloak cannot hide you from every gaze, the resurrection stone cannot truly bring the dead back. It can only let you see them. Do you want to try? Harry stared, speechless. Of course he wanted to see his parents. He had been lost in the Mirror of Erised before, but he was not the child he had been in his first year. He remembered the terror of his wand hand connecting to Voldemort's in the graveyard. That panic, that hush between life and death, came back. The faces and voices of his parents swelled within him and left him unsteady. His heart hammered and his throat tightened. After a long, quavering pause, Harry shook his head. No, he said hoarsely. Like you said, Professor, it wouldn't bring them back. It would only disturb them. Dumbledore's gaze moved to Loren. Loren shook his head quietly as well. Dumbledore smiled gently. Emotions are strengthened by restraint. Love is deepened by discipline. The line was cryptic, the sort of thing that sounded profound. Harry looked puzzled. Loren simply ignored it, preferring not to try to unravel riddles. He took another sip of tea and asked plainly, Professor, why have you begun actively destroying Horcruxes now? Did something happen? Dumbledore had collected several Horcruxes over the years, but had not destroyed them rashly. He had tried where possible to remove Voldemort's soul fragments while preserving anything of historical value. Time is pressing, he said. For what? Harry's 17th birthday is approaching. Harry froze. 17, the age he had once waited for with such eagerness. 17 meant he would not be forced to return to the Dursleys. 17 meant graduation and a step toward the life he wanted. 17 also meant the protection his mother's love had provided would finally fade. Far away, in a dimly lit room, a Death Eater lowered his head and spoke in a calm voice. Yes, 17. After that night, Dumbledore strengthened the blood bond protection around Potter. No one with ill intent can track him by magic while he remains sheltered by that bond, so even if he leaves Hogwarts, he remains safe. So we wait until next summer, said Lord Voldemort with cool amusement, leaning back into a plush sofa and toying with his wand. The wand, snakewood with a basilisk fang core, had been specially made overseas. The first Avada Kedavra it fired had paid for it. He smiled, a cruel, thin thing. Potter isn't worth our trouble now. Dumbledore and the Ministry are what matter. Snape's voice remained low. Dumbledore. Voldemort's fingertips traced the wood of his wand. His snake-like pupils narrowed. There had been frustration. His plans had not gone entirely as he intended, but there was cold satisfaction too. He had understood Dumbledore better. Alone, Dumbledore's magic could not match his. He had only been opposed by other forces, by the Elder Wand in Dumbledore's hands. When Voldemort had first regained a body at Little Hangleton, the Elder Wand had been enough for Dumbledore to gain the upper hand. In the Department of Mysteries at the Ministry, he had had to flee and rely on other powers to complete his aims. Dumbledore is old, Voldemort sniffed. If not for the ancient wards around Hogwarts, it would be far easier to break in from the outside. Snape did not look up. Then we begin at the Ministry of Magic. Since Scrimgeour took office, he has not executed our comrades nor sent them to Azkaban. They are being held in secret, interrogated for information, and blackmailed for ransom, supposedly to arm the Ministry. That could work in our favor, Voldemort said. What do you propose? Those fools recruited at the borders can be used, Snape answered. Someone needs to distract the Aurors, draw their charms and attention. In the meantime, we can tarnish the Death Eaters' reputations without exposing our real forces. Their voices trailed off into the dimness, plans already forming in the cold, patient minds that had waited 17 years for this moment. Feed the easily. Feed the easily. Time is playing tricks on us again. It's time to go back to bed, children. Good night, Professor. Good night. After the two excellent students left, Dumbledore listened to their whispers through the closing oak door. Harry was pestering for more about Horcruxes. Loren pretended not to know and made jokes that drove Harry to gnash his teeth. Laughter and low-tailed conversation came faintly through the wood. slightly distorted. Such a nostalgic age. Dumbledore's mouth curved in a fond smile. His gaze drifted down to the black gemstone on the table, and the smile slowly died. The white-haired old man sat very still, silence settling around him. After some time, he blinked, looking up at the deep blue sky beyond the window. Moonlight was thin and cold, starlight scattered and weak, only a faint, cool wash slipped into the room. Behind his half-moon spectacles, his blue eyes narrowed for a moment, unfocused. His stare returned to the desk. The ornate silver trinkets were swallowed by shadow, while the cracked black gem seemed to hold a secret, drawing the eye. Dumbledore was quiet for a beat, then reached out and touched the stone. The dim moon and starlight fractured into 1,000 tiny gleams, gathering into a transparent, almost breath-like figure. "Ariana," he whispered. October brought a chill. The ginger cat moved less and less, often curling up on the sofa until it looked like another cushion. "It'll be easy once the exams are over," was the teacher's universal lie. As sixth-year lessons fell into stride, the students slid into the miserable stretch everyone warned them about. The work for those about to graduate was heavier than the fifth-year exam cramming they joked about. Observation reports, intricate analyses of magical principles, and endless divination calculations filled their days. Weekends were swallowed by homework. The new quills bought at the start of term showed wear after only a month. Silent spell rules applied in almost every class. In defense against the dark arts, charms, and transfiguration, the moment a spell was heard, the professor's glare could hush an entire classroom, as if audible magic were a disgrace. In the common rooms in the Great Hall, sixth years practiced silent casting with flushed faces and trembling hands. Seamus, predictably, kept earning infamy for accidentally blowing up crockery. The younger pupils delighted in telling the tale again and again, and Gryffindor felt oddly like the noisy, chaotic house of 6 years ago when they had all first arrived. Advanced classes got harder. Densely packed, convoluted passages in the textbooks made comprehension a daily struggle. Professor McGonagall's explanations of Transfiguration sounded like tongue twisters, clauses piled on clauses, sentences looping back with pronouns that forced frantic page flipping to find what they referred to. Most students understood only half, and some not even that. Miss Know-It-All raised her hand constantly, not to answer, but to ask the professor to slow down or repeat herself. To teach charm connections, Professor Flitwick hunted for plain, accessible examples, his lectern nearly buried under a pile of annotated textbooks that matched his small stature. Sticky notes began to decorate pages. After a month, the books were thick with them. Professor Slughorn saw his popularity rise. Potions was practical and hands-on, so muffled classrooms weren't required and mistakes could be contained. And if a potion failed, the consequences were rarely catastrophic. Professor Sprout's greenhouse was the only place many students allowed themselves to relax a little. The plants got more dangerous by the year, but when a poisonous tendril or knobbly vine wrapped around someone unexpectedly, at least they could give a shout and fight back. One rare free Saturday afternoon, Hermione returned from a trip down to the kitchens. Whether it had been Professor Burbage's idea or Loren's, she had shed some of her old stiffness and, taking her lead from her Hufflepuff classmates, learned to speak to the house elves more naturally. They had chatted happily. She had been very pleased about it. Under Dobby's guidance, she had baked a small chiffon cake. She left half, reluctantly but properly, for the house elves, and levitated the remainder down the long courtyard path to hand to Loren in person. "Try it. I made it." Hermione stood before him, despite the October chill, a sheen of sweat on her brow. Her eyes sparkled as she presented the cut cake, 6 slender, fan-shaped slices making up half of the round. The surface was a pale, light brown, unremarkable to the eye, but trembling slightly, springy and elastic. "Do you know the difference between chiffon cake and ordinary cake?" she asked excitedly. "It's made by whipping egg whites," Loren said. "The bubbles are denser, so it's very bouncy." "Hurry, try it," she urged. Hermione chattered on, delighted. Loren met her eager gaze and felt a warmth at the familiarity. He was usually the one who fed her. This time she was offering him something she had made. He didn't answer her running commentary. He took a slice and bit in. It yielded under pressure without chewing, melting softly. The crumb was airy and fine, more delicate than pudding, not dry or clinging to the teeth. The filling seemed nearly molten, perfectly moist. The sweetness was subtle and clean. Loren, who had something of a sweet tooth, found he needed no extra honey or sugar. Looking at Hermione's hopeful, unblinking face, he let himself enjoy it. Alas, he sighed in mock tragedy. Hermione froze, eyes wide and nervous. Such a delicious cake. Why did you only give me half? And it's the leftover half. I'm sad. Her voice broke into laughter as her eyebrows knitted and her eyes crinkled. She took his arm and picked up a slice for herself, tasting gratefully. The other half was left for the house elves. They taught me how to make it. They didn't help you make it? You don't believe me. Mainly because it's too good for a first attempt, Loren said dryly. It doesn't seem like something a beginner could make. Is that a compliment? That's a statement of fact. They laughed together as the October breeze carried the cake's sweet scent through the courtyard. 652. Strange Slughorn, Hogwarts stood high and remote, its climate tempered by the ocean and the caprice of colder, darker currents. Snow had begun in mid-October. On the morning of October 19th, the wind drove the flakes against the castle windows, and the halls rang with early, excited footsteps. Loren and the others were up with the dawn. The first Hogsmeade weekend of the year had arrived. Security around the school had been tightened. Rumors had already claimed the outing might be postponed until Halloween or even Christmas, so the third years and above had largely given up hope. That made the announcement that the trip would go ahead all the sweeter. Miss Granger, who loved nothing more than studying, abandoned her homework and the house elf life survey report she'd been drafting. After being cooped up in the castle for so long, the prospect of a few hours outside, even in the cold, felt like a blessing. After breakfast, the older students left in groups. Professor McGonagall and Filch stood at the gate, checking names against a long list as in past years, but there was an extra security step. Filch manned a peculiar detector and scanned every pupil who went out. Madame Norris was nowhere to be seen. The early cold had sent the little cat burrowing somewhere warm. "What's the point of trying to smuggle dark arts stuff out?" someone muttered. "Shouldn't you be more worried about what people bring in?" Ron shot back. The detector poked Ron a few extra times for his muttering, and he pulled a face. It didn't hurt, but it was bone-chilling. Loren recognized the device at a glance. It was cobbled together from several sneakoscopes, very much in the Weasley invention vein. Whether it was an actual Weasley product or an imitation, the look and craftsmanship were the same. He'd even discussed it with George and Fred in their correspondence the week before. The roads to Hogsmeade were sealed with snow and ice, the walk more a slog than a stroll. Students hunched against the wind, scarves and robes buffeting. It was a picturesque, if miserable, procession. Mrs. Weasley's knitting kept bodies warm. Thick cashmere gloves shielded hands, but faces were bare and hypersensitive to the cold. The wind felt like knives. When it hit, it stung and pricked. Harry and Ginny huddled close, scarves pulled up to their noses, only their eyes showing. Loren's fingers went numb and his thoughts slowed. It took him a dozen steps to remember the bubblehead charm. He tossed it over the group with a grateful gasp, and the cushion of warm air eased the harshness immediately. In Hogsmeade, they glanced first toward Zonko's. The riotous joke shop they remembered was tightly shut and even boarded up. Someone had taped a scrawled "prime location for sale" sign to the window. Oh! The little group let out a collective, small sigh as they passed. At the crossroads, Hermione, lost in thought and with her bubblehead charm failing, walked into Loren's back. She looked up, a little stunned. Loren studied the others. "What's everyone doing next?" Harry and Ginny exchanged glances. "We're going to the tea shop," Harry said softly. Ron's expression turned mock sorrowful. "Ah, so you're both on dates, are you? Guess I'll wait at the Three Broomsticks." Despite the melancholy tone, his eyes glittered with mischief. He was clearly planning to drop in on Madame Rosmerta. They arranged to meet at the Three Broomsticks and split up. Harry and Ginny vanished toward the tea shop, hand in hand. Ron was left on the street with his shadow. Loren and Hermione moved slowly into Honeydukes. A "now open" sign, made of chocolate and fudge, hung in the display window. The Flume couple had introduced new sweets, warm, sugary aromas wrapped around them like a spell, bringing a momentary escape from the wind and snow. Loren plucked a pure white sugar cube from the tasting counter and popped it in. It dissolved into rich butterscotch cream on his tongue, and he closed his eyes. "If I could eat everything I wanted here for free, I'd happily do it," he said, smiling. Hermione watched him in silence. Her look suggested the terms weren't exactly equivalent. They wandered the new products and limited-time shelves a few times, made their snack selections, stocked up, and left with bellies so full that even their burps tasted of candy. As they were heading for the counter to pay, a robust, familiar voice called out behind them. "Loren, my boy." Professor Slughorn, wrapped in an extravagant fur collar and an equally grand hat, trotted up, his arms loaded with a large bag of candied jackfruit. He saw the two of them holding hands, fingers intertwined, and his smile broadened into something almost paternal. "Professor," Loren and Hermione said politely. For a while after the Felix Felicis incident, Professor Slughorn had been oddly distant from Loren. Whether in potion lessons or at slug club gatherings, he'd seemed cool and reserved, as if avoiding too much contact. It had lasted a couple of weeks, then his manner warmed again. Perhaps a touch of forgetfulness, Loren thought. "You're simply my good luck charm." Slughorn beamed, clapping Loren on the shoulder, then turned to chat with Ambrose, and without hesitation, paid for Loren and Hermione's purchase. "I can hardly wait to tell you." They fell in behind him as he headed for the three broomsticks. Slughorn's voice dropped to an excited whisper. "You wouldn't believe what those 2 vials of Felix Felicis went for. Merlin above. 800 galleons a vial, 1,600 for the pair." The grin on his face explained the sudden warmth. Loren frowned and asked, "So you're going to sell the rest, Professor?" Slughorn's expression clouded for a moment. No, I'll keep what's left. The world's so chaotic. You never know when a little, luck might be the difference between life and death. On a battlefield, a dose of luck can matter more than muscle. If anything happens, this old bone of mine might well be kept alive for decades more by it." He lowered his voice again and fumbled for the right words. "Now don't think poorly of me. I'm not trying to entice students to brew it. It's far too valuable and it draws attention. Bad attention at that. I can't have you, or myself, put in unnecessary danger." He hesitated, then softened further. "I was a little frightened not long ago. I didn't dare to be too close to you for a while." The last words were almost a murmur, barely audible. Loren let the sentence go unanswered and steered the conversation. "So, Professor, have you heard some news?" Slughorn brightened, eager to share. "Oh, yes, wonderful things. You see, those vials fetched an extraordinary price. I wasn't expecting." He fumbled in his bag for a scrap of paper or perhaps the memory itself, then continued in a rapid hush. "It's a good windfall, but keep it to yourselves, and remember, if you ever find yourselves short, come to me. I can offer a small loan or buy certain potions and ingredients, though between us, best to keep some Felix Felicis tucked away. You can never have too much of an edge, not in these times." Hermione raised an eyebrow. There was something odd beneath Slughorn's ebullience, a note of calculation she couldn't place. Loren merely nodded and fell into step beside her. The two of them swept along by Slughorn's chatter as the snow continued to fall outside the warm windows of Hogsmeade. 653. Snow and Wind. The shop signs were smudged by the thick snowstorm. Only a few neon lights burned weakly, their red and green glow doing little to cut the winter gray. Fine snowflakes dusted the fur of Slughorn's collar like tiny white flowers, bringing a raw, biting cold. The muscles in his neck tightened as he met the curious looks of his 2 students and fell silent. This was the trouble with clever pupils. No matter how he tried to dodge a topic, they had to prod and prod until he gave in. Brushing snow from his shoulder, Slughorn hesitated, then sighed. "All right," he said. "We're at Hogwarts, so I suppose I can tell you a little." They knew this professor had sources. Loren and Hermione brightened at once, eyes shining with expectation. "Promise you'll keep it secret." "We'll try, Professor." Slughorn glanced around to make sure no one was listening and that the nearest shop was 10 paces away. He relaxed fractionally and lowered his voice. "A new war is about to begin." Hermione straightened. "Hasn't it already started?" "No. Up till now it's been a stalemate. Sudden raids, probing attacks by both sides. Nothing that counts as a real war." Slughorn clutched the candied jackfruit in his hand as if for balance. A true war is when both sides are ready, face to face, wand against wand, charms against charms. In that sort of fighting, not even Dumbledore can promise anyone's safety. Is one side going to make a move? Loren asked. I've been told that there's a gathering, dark wizards, werewolves, dementors, on the border, preparing something big. Location secret, time set for Halloween Eve. So the Death Eaters are planning something? Hermione asked, puzzled. How would that turn into an open war? Slughorn let out a cloud of white breath and gave a small, relieved smile that he was still within Hogwarts grounds. Think. If I can learn of it, so can the Ministry. Do you imagine they'll let that group run wild if they get the tip-off? If the Ministry knows, they could set an ambush. Slughorn shrugged off the snow on his collar. You're too young. If students who haven't finished their schooling can come up with that, do you think those clever dark wizards wouldn't? Maybe the whole thing is a plant, false information to lure the Ministry. Maybe it's true, maybe not. I don't know how it will play out. All I know is the calm has been broken, and when that happens, some people will die or be hurt. The doors of the shops along the street hung half open. From inside came occasional bursts of laughter, which the wind quickly stole away. The storm howled on, colder, sharper. The snow had already blurred the road signs, but no one was likely to get lost. The many footprints in the drifts pointed in one unmistakable direction, the 3 broomsticks. Inside, orange flames licked the hearth, warming the whole pub. The tang of spilled ale and the heavy smoke of pipe tobacco hung in the air. Harry and Ron sat at a window table in the back. One was chattering excitedly about Quidditch, while the other stared at the barmaid and looked as lost as a boy in love. Katie's training Ginny and Demelza as chasers. They're doing really well, Harry rattled off. And Perks and Gut as beaters. They've improved so much. If we get through our first match next weekend, by mid-season, they'll be at full strength. We've got a proper shot at the cup this year. He finished in a rush, downed more than half a butterbeer, and then glanced at Ron. Ron, what are you staring at? Ron quickly tore his eyes away, flushing. Nothing. A hand nudged him from the side, and a teasing voice called, I'll give you a chance. Go ask your nothing to get us 2 butterbeers. Loren, Hermione, Harry greeted when the pair who'd come in from the cold sat down opposite them. Loren shot a mischievous look at Ron, who bolted for the bar, awkward for a step or two before his stride steadied into an eager, impatient march. Hermione glanced around. Where's Ginny? She and Luna went to Flourish and Blots. I should have known. I'd have had her bring me a couple of reams of parchment. Loren snapped a chip from the table and bit it. Didn't you buy a bunch before term? There's so much homework this semester. Parchment gets used up. I want to stock up. You could save some if you wrote a few inches less on each essay. Hermione shot him a look. We'll buy some later. Same. Harry sipped his butterbeer. He'd been waiting for a chance to show off in front of them, and now he felt the familiar itch. Footsteps sounded behind them. The 3 turned to see Ron returning with the drinks, trying, no doubt, to look dignified. He imagined himself noble and charming. Madame Rosmerta, occupied with uncorking a bottle of fire whiskey, didn't notice him. Harry couldn't help teasing. Stop trying to look cool. Madame Rosmerta isn't looking. You've done worse, Ron retorted as he handed them the butterbeer. This summer, your mum told you to help catch a hen, and you nearly got a new scar trying to impress Ginny. Harry clapped a hand over his mouth, face hot. The others struggled to keep laughter in. Finally, Loren took a sip and coughed twice, cutting through the banter. Stop fooling around. We met Professor Slughorn on the way here. What's so special about that? We have potions 4 times a week. He's always around. He told us something about Voldemort. He said dark wizards and werewolves might make a move on Halloween and that the Ministry could be planning an ambush. Loren finished the account, feeling a twinge of guilt. This was one of Slughorn's slips of the tongue, a confession after too many whiskeys, and Loren had promised to keep quiet. At the news, Harry's first instinct was to run back to Hogwarts and tell Dumbledore, but he paused. He watched his friends, thinking, and then said slowly, Do you suppose Dumbledore starting to destroy the Horcruxes he's collected might be connected to this? Silence fell for a beat. Outside, people pushed open the door and a fresh gust swept in, making the logs in the fireplace snap and spit sparks. The weather only worsened. Before they knew it, the weekend had arrived. Since Slughorn had let slip information about the rising conflict, Loren and the others had been looking for a chance to speak to Dumbledore and ask the headmaster some pointed questions. Unfortunately, Dumbledore had not shown himself all week. The headmaster's office had been empty for days, and nobody seemed to know where he was hiding. Their investigation stalled, pushed aside by piles of papers and reports that took up almost every spare minute of the students' time. Hermione in particular had little left for gathering intelligence on the Ministry or the Death Eaters. Her channels were limited, and the work was relentless. Loren, however, took a more relaxed approach. As undergraduates, they could do little to change the course of events. It seemed wiser to wait and see. Harry and Ron, for their part, hardly cared about studies. They were busier than Hermione, racing to the Quidditch pitch as soon as they finished their homework, throwing themselves into practice for the first match of the season, the team's first match together. Gryffindor versus Slytherin, a classic. Fortunately, the winter turned cold quickly, and they were spared many rain-soaked practices. The new players were improving fast, but nerves remained a problem. The team captain and keeper, Ron Weasley, was a pale, shaken figure at breakfast, his hand trembling so badly he could barely hold his bread. "Captain Ron, pull yourself together," someone snapped. Harry sat beside him and clutched that trembling hand. His own fingers started to tremble in sympathy. "Ron," he said, trying to steady both of them, "you're an experienced player. You were brilliant last season. Why are you so jumpy?" "But I'm the new captain," Ron stammered. "What if we lose? What if Gryffindor loses the cup after 5 years?" He broke off, breathless, his teeth chattering. "Everyone will blame me. They'll sing last year's taunt again. Weasley's an unfit captain. Weasley's an unfit keeper." He looked at Harry, eyes suddenly bright with a desperate idea. "Why don't you be captain, Harry?" "All right," Harry said. "Huh? I'll take it. Let's tell the team now." Ron's objections died on his lips. "I can go talk to them myself." "Then go motivate them." Harry said, "Stop moping." Words failed Ron for a moment. Stunned, he rose and wandered along the long house table, greeting the players awkwardly, pulling funny faces to try and relieve the tension, and urging everyone to eat, an imitation of Wood and Angelina that somehow lightened the atmosphere. The Gryffindor table grew livelier. At the far end of the table, Loren was spreading mayonnaise on his bread when something in his peripheral vision caught his eye. "Hermione, look, Dumbledore's here," he hissed. Hermione looked up. The headmaster, who had been absent all week, stood a little disheveled, beard and hair untidy, a touch more worn than usual, but his pale blue eyes shone with unusual brightness. He caught their gaze, smiled, and winked. It was an invitation. Loren and Hermione understood immediately. Dumbledore had something to tell them. There was no need for words. It was like a teacher calling on a pupil in class. Sometimes a single look said more than sentences. They lowered their heads and continued their breakfasts. Soon, the Quidditch captain and players gathered to discuss tactics, and before long, they left the Great Hall to the cheers of many Gryffindors and headed for the pitch. Team members had to arrive early, jerseys to change into, broom checks, warm-up flights. The stands filled more leisurely, groups of friends walking together, speculating about the match. A few entrepreneurial students, following Fred and George's example, carried small betting booths that made the walk to the pitch unusually noisy and crowded. Loren and Hermione lagged behind the throng when, as if by chance, a white-bearded old man appeared beside them. The three of them passed the marble staircase and, without speaking, turned off from the path to the pitch and began to climb. Halfway up, Hermione asked, "Professor, where have you been this week?" Dumbledore considered the question. "Oh, a bit of security consulting at the Ministry," he said. "Was it tiring?" Hermione asked softly, taking in his rumpled beard. "You look worn." "My work there was not especially heavy," he said, "but there are other reasons I have looked like this. Trivial matters, perhaps. I'll tell you if there's a proper opportunity." He made a small, guilty cough into a loosely closed fist. Before going to the Hog's Head, he had steeled himself. After all, he'd invited Gellert to join the school as a professor and had even produced the resurrection stone in front of Aberforth. Although Aberforth's scholarship could not compare with his own, his physical resilience was stronger. Loren glanced at Dumbledore's face as they walked. He thought, perhaps imaginatively, that part of the bridge of the headmaster's nose looked a little more crooked than before. On the 8th floor, in the bright warmth of the headmaster's office, Dumbledore sat behind his desk, stroked his beard, and took out a delicate white porcelain teapot. He poured 3 steaming cups of pumpkin juice, something altogether richer than the juice from the school kitchen, brought back from the hogshead. Fawkes the Phoenix perched on the windowsill, basking in the rare winter sun. Outside, a clear blue sky stretched without a cloud, the sunlight making the snow sparkle. In the distance, the Quidditch pitch was busy. The swathes of golden and scarlet in the stands were unmistakable. Hermione lifted her cup and blew on it, watching the steam thin and blur the silver rim. "Professor," she asked, "did you want to speak with us about something?" "No hurry," Dumbledore replied. "Let us speak of your concerns first." "Last week in Hogsmeade," Hermione began, "Professor Slughorn." Dumbledore listened with only a small change in expression, as Loren and the others had expected. He already knew. "Scrimgeour came to me about that matter as well," he said when she paused. "He wanted me to lead an operation against Lord Voldemort and asked that I involve other Hogwarts professors. He hoped for a decisive victory." "You refused," Loren said. "Yes." Dumbledore's voice was calm. "I believe the Ministry's understanding of Lord Voldemort is incomplete. Even the renowned Albus Dumbledore, when all was said and done, was not a Ministry of Magic man. Decades earlier, he had had some unknown connection to Grindelwald. A year ago, he'd made that sudden trip to Nurmengard to free a prisoner. The Austrian Ministry had not formally protested, but the rumor mill had not been kind. To the British Ministry, he remained an enigma. Eccentric, inscrutable, repeatedly declining the post of Minister for Magic and retired to the seclusion of the headmaster's office at Hogwarts, yet his influence leaked through that narrow window to touch the entire wizarding world. He had been the first to insist Voldemort had returned. He had stood against Voldemort time and again. He had protected the students. In a time like this, more witches and wizards preferred to place their trust in one extraordinary schoolmaster than in the magical government. Members of the Order of the Phoenix were embedded everywhere: the Ministry, the Wizengamot, the International Confederation of Wizards. From what Dumbledore had uncovered, he held the deepest secret of Voldemort's resurrection, which suggested there were traitors and infiltrators close to the Death Eaters. That raised too many questions. Why had Dumbledore insisted Voldemort still lived when everyone else celebrated his downfall? Why did he stubbornly protect Severus Snape? Why had he begun probing into related matters so early? How did he know about the hidden truths of the Crouches and Voldemort's plans? Why hadn't he been surprised when Voldemort escaped at the Department of Mysteries? For Rufus Scrimgeour, the new minister, Dumbledore's unpredictability was unnerving. Scrimgeour tried to be cautious. He understood he should trust Dumbledore and the Order, but the Order's opaque presence put him on edge. He could not help wondering who among those around him might belong to the Order, what their true motives were. Scrimgeour was no fool like Fudge. He spoke with Dumbledore before the All Hallows' Eve operation. Some long-standing doubts were cleared up, though not enough for the Ministry to drop its guard. The result was an uneasy truce at best. The mystery of Voldemort's resurrection remained. A former Death Eater and Potions Master was missing, and the Order itself remained shadowy, personnel unknown, movements erratic, objectives uncertain. Most importantly, Dumbledore disapproved of the Ministry's All Hallows' Eve encirclement. He believed their intelligence was flawed and that the operation was another trap. The two men parted on bad terms, but Scrimgeour at least accepted some of Dumbledore's counsel. He left forces guarding the Ministry and arranged for the transfer and concealment of the captured Death Eaters, telling only a handful of top officials where they were held. "Rufus is a competent minister," Dumbledore said, watching the steam curl up from his teacup, his deep blue eyes crinkling behind his spectacles. "But I cannot tell him about the Horcruxes. If he knew, others in the Ministry would know. The human heart is as deep as the Black Lake, and a Horcrux is a buried Pandora's box." Hermione's face showed concern. Then in this fight, will the Ministry's Aurors suffer heavy losses? In the end, they will win, Dumbledore replied, his fingers smoothing the teacup. Even with Werewolf and Dementor support, those dark wizards are no match for true Death Eaters. Some of them are under Imperius, others are only in it for the money. Rufus has prepared thoroughly. So long as Voldemort himself does not appear, the Aurors will not be defeated. Hermione frowned. But Professor, you said it was a trap. It is a trap for the Ministry, and it is a trap for dark wizards, Dumbledore said. Voldemort's aim is to free an old servant. Loren raised an eyebrow. Can he succeed? Dumbledore only took a small sip of tea. I don't know Voldemort's exact plan. Perhaps he has already learned the new detention site. Perhaps he has other ways. Hermione fell silent, lowering her head to sip her pumpkin juice as she considered the possible shifts and dangers. Loren opened his mouth to speak when Dumbledore bent over, opened a drawer, and took out an exquisite Ravenclaw diadem. It was silver, fashioned into the shape of an eagle with wings outstretched and a slight sidelong turn to its head. Blue gems studded the feathering, elegant and austere. These are not things for you to worry over, Dumbledore said as he set the diadem on the table with a clear, metallic chime. The portraits of past headmasters on the wall behind them seemed to hold their breath for a moment, as if the very sight of the diadem touched them. I disturbed your Quidditch watching to destroy this Ravenclaw diadem, or rather, to destroy the fragment of soul attached to it. Hermione's hand paused. The names rushed back. The diadem, the Grey Lady, Nagini, and the word Horcrux. She looked at Dumbledore, confused. Destroy a Horcrux? Shouldn't Harry be here for that? Dumbledore pushed the diadem toward her and smiled with a gentle brightness. Facing Voldemort and defeating him is a burden Harry cannot avoid, but the task is too big for him alone. He must rely on you, on his trusted friends, to accomplish it. I want you to be the one to come into contact with this Horcrux. If you can, I hope you will destroy it. Loren's eyes widened. Me? Hermione, after a brief pause, was composed rather than flustered. She did not refuse. Instead, she asked practically, how should I do it? Dumbledore looked a little surprised at her steadiness. Didn't you already destroy a Horcrux once? Slytherin's locket, Hermione answered, staring at the gleaming diadem and replaying the memory. I haven't mastered Fiendfire. That leaves Basilisk Fangs, or Gryffindor's sword. At a wave of Dumbledore's hand, the sorting hat on the shelf hopped forward. When he handed it to Hermione, the ruby-studded hilt of the sword, gleaming and true, was already visible within the hat. The moment Hermione drew the blade, as if sensing the danger, the Ravenclaw diadem shivered. The cold flash of the sword passed over it. The diadem trembled again, more violently, as if something within it strained to break free. Skef 6. Ron is confused. Hermione pursed her lips. She didn't know why Dumbledore insisted she do it herself, but it wasn't difficult. She weighed the sword in her hand. Maybe it was the goblin making. The last time she held this blade, it hadn't felt heavy, and 5 years on, it still didn't feel light. It felt natural. The tip of the sword found the hollow in the center of the Ravenclaw diadem, where the largest sapphire should have sat, but no longer did. The diadem trembled, radiating fear. Hermione pushed the sword down with scarcely any effort. A harsh rending sound rang out. A thick black mist burst free, and an oppressive, malignant aura swept over the headmaster's office. A hoarse voice began to wail from the shattered diadem. It hissed, cutting through the mist. I hear the voices in your mind. I know your desires. Loren tightened his grip on his wand. Dumbledore sat quietly behind his desk, his clear blue eyes as still as a frozen lake. The voice continued, cruel and persuasive. I hear your dreams, Hermione Granger. You want to save those poor, humble elves. You want. Hermione drove the sword home before the seduction could finish. Metal cracked with a crisp, terrible sound. The shriek that followed tore through the air, and the black mist dispersed. The diadem lay split from front to back, a long, narrow gash through its center. Calmly, Hermione sheathed the sword in the sorting hat, as if slipping a blade back into scabbard. Loren had to admit it. The little witch looked incredibly cool. Almost, he thought wryly, like him. A thunderous cheer rolled in from the direction of the Quidditch pitch, making the office windows tremble. Dumbledore smiled. It is time to say goodbye, he said. There will likely be a victory celebration in the common room. I won't speak of certain matters here, but that shouldn't keep you from enjoying your win." Loren and Hermione's questions died on their lips. They exchanged a look that said the same thing. No wonder Scrimgeour had never liked Dumbledore. Some things, it seemed, were best left unasked. The portrait hole exploded open, and a tide of noise swept up the 7th floor. Gryffindor students poured into the common room, jubilant, congratulating one another. The younger ones clustered around Seamus and Dean, chattering about the match in breathless detail and even miming the players' moves. Some raged about the Slytherin team's unsportsmanlike behavior. Others roasted the new commentator. Seamus and Dean lamented in mock heroic tones that they hadn't been treated to Loren as a commentator these days, a detail that made the younger children laugh and roll their eyes. By catching fragments of conversations, Loren and Hermione pieced together the story of the match. Gryffindor had dominated. They led by 60 points just half an hour in. Ginny had scored 4 goals and stunned the crowd with her skill. Ron had guarded all attacks with steady, reliable saves. Parvati and Angelina had worked seamlessly. Harry and Katie, the veterans, had less room to show off but were central to the defense. The new commentator, who had replaced Lee Jordan, was Zacharias Smith of Hufflepuff, not a popular choice. He'd apparently prowled the commentary box with an air of arrogant chatter that grated on the Gryffindors. Ernie, now in his 6th year and a Hufflepuff prefect, had acquired an air of calm that reminded some of Cedric, a small consolation. The noisy, celebratory energy in the common room slowly dissolved the heaviness that had clung to Loren and Hermione since the headmaster's office. They avoided the crush and took their usual place at a small round table. Crookshanks materialized from nowhere, rubbed his head against Loren's shoe with a territorial purr, and settled down. They produced snacks and poured steaming tea. From their seats, they watched the team members being tossed exuberantly into the air and caught, the room erupting in applause each time someone soared and came down safe. The players were hoisted higher and higher, the crowd laughing, singing, and cheering. After a few tosses, the team was still rising, and some of the younger students literally swooned with admiration. When Harry and Ginny finally squeezed free of the fray, their hair mussed and robes crumpled. The common room made space for them. "Tsk," someone teased. "Why are the stars hiding at the edge of the stage?" "Don't be sarcastic, Loren," Hermione said with a smile. Harry grabbed a cup of tea and drank it in a single gulp, then fussed with his robe. He had been protecting Ginny through the crowd and hadn't noticed someone taking advantage of his distraction. A hand had pinched his arm. And then, much to his embarrassment, someone, apparently a boy, had pinched his behind as well. He slapped a hand to his hip in reaction and made a face. "Where's Ron?" Ginny asked after taking a calming sip of tea, feeling the afterglow of excitement. She glanced around, frowning as if something small and important had gone missing. "There," Loren said, nodding toward the center of the clearing crowd. "By the flowers." The crowd parted like a sea for Lavender Brown. The Gryffindors made a wide ring and watched, breathless, as the blonde witch stepped forward with flowers in her hands. Ron sat where he had been shoved, looking bewildered. Lavender's voice trembled as she called loudly, "Ron Weasley." She handed him the flowers and, cheeks flushed, blurted, "I like you. Will you be with me?" Ron's mind blanked. Without thinking, some instinct made him accept the flowers. He stood there, feeling awkward and ridiculous, and before he could form a reply, Lavender threw herself at him. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him. Long, wet, overwhelming. The scent of a familiar perfume hit him, the warmth and softness of her body pressed to his, the strange sensation of her mouth exploring his all at once. He felt suffocated, dizzy, as if he were being pulled under. Air rushed back into his lungs after what felt like an age. He blinked and saw Lavender's bright face up close, heard the roar of cheering around him. He managed, in a small, stunned voice, It feels not bad." Cold rain mixed with snow drove against the frosted window panes, and in the blink of an eye, Halloween had arrived. Hermione stood outside Professor Coretti Burbage's office. Before she knocked, she glanced down at the house elf trailing behind her. The elf called Wheat stood quietly at her side, holding a gift for the professor. His posture was polite, but not fawning, unlike most house elves, and he seemed even thinner than in years past. A neatly pressed black and white tailcoat hung loosely on his narrow frame. The skin beneath was drawn tight over little flesh, as if he were a puppet carved from wood. Still, no one would mistake him for weak. His slightly protruding eyes were bright and clear, his spirit alert. She knocked. "Come in," came Burbage's voice. Hermione slid into the chair and leaned forward to peer at the papers the Muggle Studies professor was marking, close enough to read without raising her head. They had spoken in this office hundreds of times over the years. There was no awkwardness between them. "Trick or treat," Hermione called cheerfully. "Wizards don't have that custom," Burbage replied. "But you're the professor of Muggle Studies. You haven't even put on makeup. I'm a witch. That's a bit typecast. Then give me candy." Spending all this time with Mr. Morgan, even the dignified Miss Granger has learned to be playful, Burbage said with a smile. She set her quill back into the inkwell, closed the stack of students' papers, and reached into a drawer. She handed Hermione a few treasured Muggle chocolate bars. Burbage glanced past Hermione and saw the house elf for the first time. Her expression turned to mild surprise at seeing a house elf with eyes so bright. "Miss Granger," she said, "you're not usually the sort to send house elves on errands." "I didn't send Wheat," Hermione said. "He wanted to see you." Wheat bowed, not with the servile sweep of a house elf, but more like a gentleman acknowledging an equal. He set the meal box he was carrying on the professor's desk and, forcing his high voice to sound steadier, said, "Hello, Professor Burbage. I am Wheat." Hermione hurried to explain. These pumpkins were grown by Wheat, Dobby, and Winky. They cleared a patch in the Forbidden Forest, used to be Acromantula territory. Professor Hagrid gave them the seeds. This is the biggest one they harvested. "It's steamed pumpkin," Wheat added eagerly. "It's sweet." Burbage looked at the box, then at Hermione, then at Wheat. "Wheat, I've heard of you. Hermione has mentioned you many times. From this pumpkin, it's clear you've been studying those books they left for you. That's a considerable achievement." Wheat's chest swelled. Mr. Morgan and Miss Granger hadn't exaggerated. Professor Burbage was genuinely kind. He tried to steady his voice. I don't understand everything, Professor. Things like maritime trade, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, those are hard for me." "Those finer details aren't important for house elves now," Burbage said. "What matters is that you understand the bigger picture." "Thank you, Professor Burbage," Wheat whispered. "Did you come for a particular reason?" she asked. "I have some questions," he said. "There's still a few hours before the Halloween feast. I think we have time," Burbage replied. The professor was patient, and Wheat was an eager pupil. Both viewed Muggle civilization with an outsider's curiosity, and often their perspectives aligned more closely than even Hermione's. A new chapter in a long history, Hermione thought in a historian's voice as she slipped out of the office. Hogwarts didn't have a tradition of dressing up and begging for sweets, but the castle had changed its clothes for the night. Torches had been replaced with eerie blue phosphorescence. Pumpkin lanterns floated along the corridors. Loren leaned on the banister, watching the bats who clustered in the shadowed corners like a dark, fluttering cloud. Their calls were inaudible to human ears, but their wings and frantic motion filled the air with a chattering, lively quality. Gloomy animals that somehow seemed a little ridiculous together. Hermione went to the girls' lavatory to finish her makeup. When she came back out, her lips were pressed into a thin line and her brows were slightly knit. She turned the corner and spotted Loren still watching the bats. She hooked her arm through his and began to climb toward the common room. "Why not go straight to the Great Hall? It's packed for Halloween," Loren said without looking away. His eyes were fixed on a bat that had repeatedly smacked the stone and seemed dazed. "Go back to the common room and find Parvati," Hermione said. "Tell her to pop into the girls' lavatory and catch someone." Loren's interest was immediate. Catch who? Why? Someone's planning to spike tonight's food with a love potion. "Oh, I know about that," Loren said. Hermione turned to him, surprised. "How do you know? This is in the girls' lavatory." "George and Fred told me," Loren shrugged. "We were talking about anti-jinx robes last weekend, and they said a bunch of girls had ordered love potion from the joke shop. They warned me to be careful." "But Filch has banned all trick shop products," Hermione began, then stopped. Filch's bands rarely survived contact with students, and even the headmaster sometimes sidestepped school rules. She thought for a moment and asked, how did they even get it past owl inspections? They didn't label them, Loren said. They said the Weasleys' shop will put the potion in perfume or cough syrup bottles. That's a special service they put on owl orders. Hermione's face went hard. Those girls should get detention, and Fred and George should be punished too. She thought through the rule books. The school parchments were long and tedious, and there was no rule that recalled graduated students to Hogwarts for punishment. The best she could do would be to report it to a prefect and push for detentions for anyone involved tonight. But she made a mental note to campaign for better disciplinary rules once she worked at the ministry. Pouring love potion into the Quidditch players' cups was bad enough. The idea of anyone, especially the girls, targeting students like Loren enraged her. She was going to make sure they were caught. 658, Winter of the Giants, starlight fills the sky. That was today's password. I hope so, the fat lady said melancholically. Before passing through the portrait hole, Loren paused and glanced back at the corridor sky. Night had already fallen. Thick, ink-black clouds swallowed the stars. The darkness felt eerie and sinister, perfect for Halloween. Inside the common room, though, everything was bright and warm. Pumpkin lanterns and enchanted candles hung from the ceiling, and the firelight from the hearth cast an orange glow over the soft armchairs. The feast hadn't started yet. A few students lingered in the common room, reading, playing chess, doing homework, and making out. The sight was rather undignified. In the armchair at the center of the room, Lavender and Ron were locked in a passionate embrace. Most of the other students here had grown used to it. Ever since they announced they were together on the night of the Quidditch match, scenes like this had become common. Lavender Brown was hopelessly in love with Ron Weasley. Every second she couldn't kiss him felt like a waste. Their friends, however, couldn't hide their discomfort. Harry, Ginny, Hermione, and Parvati huddled in a corner, trying to look casual but clearly embarrassed. Hermione put an arm around Parvati, the prefect, and pulled Ginny in close. The three girls whispered quietly. Loren sat down beside Harry, casually grabbed a handful of every flavor beans and popped a few in his mouth. Have you been watching? No. How long have they been kissing? What? How long have those two been going at it? Since we got back from Charms. So, almost 2 hours. I don't know. New relationships are certainly passionate. Loren glanced over at Ron, who was panting between kisses, eyes glassy and a little dazed. Then he snatched up the remaining every flavor beans from the table. Are you going to stay here and watch a romance drama or go downstairs to the Great Hall to watch a horror show? Huh? Harry sounded puzzled. Sir Nicholas said there's a new ghost play at this year's Halloween feast. The death of Sir Bobbington the Wizard has been staged many times, Loren said. This year, it's the death of Myrtle the Witch. Harry's eyebrows shot up. For a moment, he couldn't decide which would be better. Both sounded terrible. Then he decided it didn't matter whose corpse the play showcased. Anything was better than watching Lavender and Ron. With Hermione planning to expose the love potion trick in the girls' bathroom, Parvati the prefect set off to uphold school rules, and the remaining four slipped out of the common room, taking advantage of Ron's infatuation to leave undisturbed. Ben Nevis. Winter had come down hard on the mountain-dwelling giants. For creatures with poor memories, the ache of hunger was etched into every bone, making last winter and the long, bitter months that followed feel painfully fresh. The lakes had frozen. Ice had to be broken with rocks before one could reach liquid water beneath. Fish were scarce, and the hunts for wild boar and bear often ended with only a couple of scrawny carcasses to show for days of effort. Prey animals, like the giants themselves, only left their dens when hunger forced them out, thin, picked clean of fat. It was not uncommon for some giants to die before the thaw. Frozen meat and frozen fish total 17,000 pounds, Gale counted, drawing on the snow with a thin branch. Potatoes total 30,000 pounds. Wheat, he paused, then looked up at the expectant face of Mir, the female giant. Gather everything we have in the tribe, he said at last. Centralize it, manage it properly, distribute as needed. It won't fill everyone's bellies, but it will get us through the winter. Mir's great eyes filled. She smiled through the tears. Everyone can get through this winter. That's good. No giant will starve to death. Ole, leaning against a boulder, smiled too. All that hunting through autumn wasn't for nothing. We must be strict with the distribution, Mir said, wiping her face and drawing in a breath. Fixed times, fixed rations every day. We can't hand out the whole winter stockpile at once like last year. They remembered last winter all too well. There had been stores, but poor management had been disastrous. Ole had organized the hunting and searches, and there had been enough until they made a terrible mistake. They'd given each giant their whole winter's ration up front. Some had eaten 4 months' worth of supplies in a single month, and the rest of the winter had been starvation. 1.5 months later, on a night when Ole was away from camp, the starving grew desperate and attacked others in the tribe. Mir refused to replay the memory. All she could see was a full moon and blood on the snow. "Leave the thinking to you two," Ole said awkwardly, turning his head. "Calculate it thoroughly, double and triple check." Gale, the cleverest of the 3 siblings, had a colder edge to his expression. The food in their caves and the frozen meat buried under drifts would not last the whole tribe. Mir wanted everyone to live to see spring. Ole agreed. Gale had another thought. It would be wiser to reserve enough so that at least some could eat well. The old and weak might not be worth wasting food on, Gale argued silently. Bent backs, shriveled legs, failing organs, those who survived would be of little use. He tried to voice the argument, but seeing Mir's reddened eyes silenced him. He said nothing. A few minutes later, Ole's roar split the hollow, setting off a ripple of snow down the mountainside. One by one, the giants came out of their caves, shaking the ground with their steps as they approached the bonfire at the hollow's center. Most of the adults couldn't grasp the nuance of their leader's call. They only knew food would be handed out: salted smoked meat, roasted potatoes, warmed snow water. Even the names Ole, Gale, and Mir were hard for many to pronounce. Instead, they slurred them together when they shouted, calling out as one, "Ymir." 659, lightning breaks the sky. When he stepped through the portrait entrance into the great hall, the room brightened all at once. Thousands of pumpkin lanterns floated in midair. Pale ribbons of cloth spewed flame and sometimes coalesced into roaring lions. Flapping bats gathered like dark, living clouds, and wandering ghosts made the air a few degrees colder. A sudden flash of lightning lit Loren's face, and he squinted instinctively. The dome's simulated lightning was uncannily realistic and a little dazzling. He sat down at the Gryffindor table. Hermione's voice was at his side, tinged with wonder. "Those fire-breathing ribbons are incredible. Look, they can turn into lions. We never had anything like this at Halloween before. Professor Flitwick must have discovered a new spell for decorating the castle." "Maybe not Flitwick," Loren replied casually. "Those flames look more like Professor Bagshot's work. Orange with a little light blue undercurrent." Bagshot. Hermione softened her voice and stole a glance toward the stage, where the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor was whispering with Dumbledore. She remembered reading that Bagshot had a talent for fire magic. For a moment, she felt oddly unsettled. It was irrational, but the living flames made her picture the castle catching fire. The unease hung with her until the Hogwarts Ghost Troupe began its performance. Ghosts oozed from the walls and from beneath the floor. After the opening procession and the orchestral prelude, the piece, The Death of Myrtle the Witch, starring Myrtle herself, began. It was overwrought, histrionic, full of exaggerated expressions and messy lines, all the things Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Porpington had been nitpicking in his head. He could not forgive that Myrtle's act had supplanted his own. It felt like a betrayal of Hogwarts tradition, even if that tradition was only 500 years old. But setting that aside, the play was entertaining. The students applauded and cheered with relish, which made Myrtle sob all the more theatrically. Meanwhile, far above in the Ministry of Magic, Senior Undersecretary Amelia Bones, temporarily acting as minister and tucked into her office at headquarters, was finishing Mrs. Edgecombe of the Flu Network Management Authority's report. She burned the note to ash, wrote a new order on parchment, and with a tap of her wand, watched the paper fold into a tiny airplane and fly off. Orders were being sent to the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad, the Obliviator Headquarters, and the Muggle-Worthy Exceptions Committee, all on standby, and the rest of the staff remaining. She read aloud, confirming the last line. She set down her quill and rubbed her forehead, easing the tension that had been built up for hours. "Bertha, help me. Have we missed anything?" At another desk, Bertha Jorkins checked through a list of responsibilities and shook her head. "No omissions. Everyone is accounted for." "We must remain vigilant," Bones said, fatigue and anxiety visible in the tight set of her brows. "Rufus has led the Aurors on the most dangerous mission. We stay here as their logistics and support. We must be ready to respond to anything." "I know, Miss Bones." Jorkins had grown into a competent, calm official, no longer the muddled clerk she once was. "All defenses have been activated, all exits sealed, apparition blocked where needed. As the Aurors left, fireplaces were extinguished and shut down." Bones' eyes lingered on the Ministry's shimmering alchemical array. She repeated the word softly. "Fireplaces." Across the countryside, in Hastings, nearly 100 kilometers from London, a simple hearth had been set up on the edge of Holiday Park. The kindling was lit and fresh flue powder sprinkled between the oily pine. Emerald flames licked upward, the magic in them forming a discreet transportation hub, a secret node on the Department of Transport's network. Hours earlier, as those green flames rose, fireplaces in the Ministry's corridor had ignited in turn. Aurors stepped into the fire and arrived in this small border town, concealed among oddly costumed muggles. The Aurors were fully equipped and ready. The sky had not yet shown a single star. An ink-black dusk deepened and a cold wind swept through the streets, as if trying to snuff out the night's festivities. Costumed crowds milled near Holiday Park, people in bright makeup, women counting sweets, children shrieking with delight. Behind a cookie stall, Nymphadora Tonks, teeth elongated into a fangish grin, hair standing up in a wild style, chewing gum and blowing bubbles, watched with amusement. "Their way of celebrating is fascinating," she said, popping a bubble. "We're on a mission," Kingsley murmured. His face was painted in black and white to resemble a skull. His voice was calm and professional. "Keep an eye on the temperature. If you suddenly feel cold, a Dementor may be nearby. And remember, being bitten by a werewolf has lasting effects even if it's not a full moon." Tonks only half listened, still amused by the scene. A little girl in a witch costume approached shyly. Tonks smiled. "Oh, a little witch? Want some sweets?" The girl glanced nervously at the skull-faced man beside Tonks and muttered, "Trick or treat." Tonks laughed. "How are you going to trick me?" The girl froze. Adults ordinarily gave sweets when the phrase was uttered. Who asked what kind of trick she planned? "Why dress as a witch?" Tonks asked, drawing the words out playfully. "Aye." The child fumbled with her fingers. "Don't you know how to prank people?" Tonks squatted and put an arm around her, sliding a Bertie Bott's every flavor bean into the child's hand. "I'll teach you a few. If someone won't give you sweets, use your wand to make their front teeth grow like squirrel teeth. That's what I used to do." She rattled off names of prank spells: Densaujo, Rictus Empra, Tarantalegra, the Bat Bogey Hex, and the little girl listened, equal parts frightened and enthralled. Kingsley watched in silence. He didn't doubt Tonks' tales, but he worried about the trouble the child might become when she eventually arrived at Hogwarts. In London, at 10 Downing Street, lights burned in every office as staff processed urgent work with an air of unease. Only a skeleton crew should have been there tonight, but 2 hours earlier, an emergency notice had ordered everyone back. Assistant Minister Herbert Corley drummed his fingers on his desk until he caught himself. The rapid tapping betrayed his nerves. He glanced at Emmeline Vance beside him, who looked equally impatient. They had been supposed to be in Hastings or holding the ministry line, not here babysitting Muggle offices and leafing through bureaucratic files. He wondered what Kingsley had been thinking, that he got to go on the field job. In the innermost office, the Prime Minister read a folder that hid most of his face. He let his eyes dart across the pages and out to the portrait on the wall, a dumpy man whose painted eyes darted anxiously and who had left the frame several times in 2 hours. The Prime Minister's suspicions hardened. He'd checked the night duty roster at the last minute and found that the 3 wizards assigned to his protection were all absent. That could not be coincidence. The recall of staff was a cover, he thought. Someone was targeting the magical world. He read the report again, making mental notes. Back in the Great Hall, the dome had shifted to a stormy sky. Wind howled and thunder rolled, scattering lanterns and bats. The students were undeterred. Plates full of charred roast beef and lamb chops, reddish tomato bisque, and crystal-juiced pies lined the long tables. Boys ate until they nearly burst. Even the girls who usually watched their waistlines went back for seconds. Hermione felt her stomach stretch, set her knife and fork down, and glanced toward the head table. Professor Firenze isn't here, she noticed. Did he go back to his herd for the festival? Loren looked up and thought for a moment. Centaurs probably don't celebrate Halloween like we do. I seem to remember Firenze being shunned by the others. They've reestablished contact. Ginny, who took Firenze's divination class, said from across the table. The constellations have shifted a lot lately. The herd's having a bonfire ritual to read the stars, and they called Firenze back. Harry scratched his head. Last time we passed his classroom, he told us not to trust the stars completely. He said not to trust them completely, not to distrust them entirely. Ron started, then flinched as Lavender squeezed past and insisted on feeding him in an over-earnest flourish. The nearby students recoiled in shared disgust, and Ron found his face half covered with a beef pie. He looked to Harry, Ginny, Loren, and Hermione with bafflement. Why did he feel so out of step with everyone? Thunder cracked inside the dome. Carved pumpkins trembled and flames guttered. Shadows lengthened and flapped as bats swept across the rafters. Loren sipped his mushroom soup and murmured, "The centaur's constellations." He lowered his gaze to the pendant at his chest. The dolphin carved from cypress was pale as bone, its eye gems 2 different colors. The pendant's inner space, enlarged by an undetectable extension charm, was stirring. He felt a faint warmth, like something beginning to wake. Light and shade played across his pupils, and an inner, crystalline blue glow shimmered. He could sense through the runes and alchemical warding, the spatial barrier thinned. The cover of the Book of Abraham trembled ever so slightly. 660. Ms. Bones. A booming crack of thunder split the sky. Amelia Bones startled awake, her eyes snapping open. The slightly rough parchment under her fingers felt real and comforting. She exhaled and decided she might as well stop trying to rest. There were papers to go through. She reached for her quill, meaning to keep working, then paused. The quill in her hand had splattered a blot of ink across the page. A sudden, inexplicable unease prickled through her. Her heart beat faster. Amelia frowned at the blot, then glanced around. The minister's office door stood half open. There were no warning paper cranes or fluttering notices. Bertha Jorkins sat at a nearby desk, bent over her own pile of papers. The fire in the grate burned quietly. The thunder had faded. Everything seemed normal. So what was wrong? Her gaze slid to the protective wards not far from her. The complex ring of runes that guarded the office glowed gently, but then Amelia saw the topmost runes shatter. Irregular fragments of light broke off and slithered into the other runes. Her pupils narrowed. She pushed to her feet. "Someone is attacking the Ministry of Magic," she cried. Holiday Park, a different scene. Nymphadora Tonks had a little girl dressed as a witch curled in her arms and was telling a story in a theatrically witchy voice, enticing and playful. The child listened with rapt attention, hardly remembering her parents' earlier warnings to head home. "What do the potions do?" the girl asked, wide-eyed. Tonks started to answer with a laugh. Instead, the child in her arms shivered. A chill ran across Tonks's exposed skin. The air tasted damp and fishy. She turned, watching the crowd spread across the open park. More and more costumed figures appeared, ghosts and ghouls from movies and books, but also hooded people whose faces were hidden, moving silently among the other visitors. She lowered her voice. "Kingsley." "Understood." A calm reply came from across the crowd. The child, puzzled by the terse answer, thought but did not ask aloud what had been understood. Tonks crouched to the little girl's level. "Do you remember where your home is?" Out of some odd trust, the child answered without hesitation. "Little Winging, Wisteria Walk, number 6. Before she could process the response, Tonks felt the girl go rigid, and then the other woman, an older sisterly figure, had the child in her arms. With a small pop in the air, the child was pressed as if through a tight tube, an instant of crushing pressure that seemed to stretch forever. When it stopped, the older woman's voice was soft. "Stay home. Don't run about." The child opened her eyes at her own front door. The strange woman was gone. The street lamps threw a gentle yellow light across the step. Back at the ministry, Bertha Jorkins lay on the floor and watched in humiliation as the black-robed man approached. She tried to rise but failed, tearing the wound on her arm and sending dark blood spilling. Severus Snape, expressionless, kicked the fallen wand aside and looked at her arm. The cut, sectum sempra, sliced clean through muscle. The edges were too neat to heal quickly. Warm iron filled the room like a sick perfume. Amelia had sent the warning, and those still at the ministry had moved to respond. But Lord Voldemort had not come alone. Officials who could be used were seized under Imperius. Those he deemed useless were killed. In 10 minutes, he had fought from deep underground up to the minister's office. Amelia stood at her desk, wand raised, every inch of her determined. "Hastings was a trap set by you," she accused. Voldemort stepped through the doorway with languid grace, forcing her to retreat with each measured stride. He glanced at Jorkins and Snape at his feet and smiled without warmth. "Of course it wasn't a trap, my dear Madam Bones. Please believe your aurors will do their utmost. And, of course, so will I." "You used your supporters as bait," Amelia spat. "Strictly speaking, they were not my servants," he said smoothly. "My true servants were hidden from you, weren't they?" His voice was velvet and venom. Amelia's back hit the bookcase. There was nowhere left to go. Rage flared in her eyes, and magical energy began to spiral around her. Her robes billowed, her wand tip flared with desperate light. Voldemort halted, his pale face split by a contemptuous smile. "Amelia Bones," he purred, "you have a brother, do you not?" The words came at leisure, each one calculated. "Edgar Bones. He died in the last war. A family of 3. Their address was leaked by Augustus, and the Lestranges found them. No killing curse was used, oh no." He leaned closer as if sharing a private joke. "They were tortured to death with Crucio. A pity they did not enjoy the same fortune as the Longbottoms, wouldn't you agree?" Amelia's breath hitched. Fury flooded her face. "Avada!" She lunged for the curse, green light gathering at her wand tip. It failed to fire. An invisible pressure tightened around her throat, as if a thick serpent had coiled there, squeezing the air from her lungs. The spell could not be completed. Voldemort smiled, cruel and pleased. "You are too slow. Has no one ever told you that Avada Kedavra requires the deepest malice to work?" "Humph, humph." Amelia made a choking sound, eyes blazing with impotent hatred. Voldemort drank in her expression like wind to a fire. He wanted to feed on it. "That's right," he said softly. "Hate me with everything you have. Show me your resentment. Let me hear the curses in your heart. Most importantly, open your memories and show me where you hid my precious servants." Crucio. Pain tore through Amelia with the force of a physical blow. Her whole body convulsed. Veins stood out on her temples. Her muscles writhed. The agony shattered her mental defenses. Still, even as she twisted, she managed a bitter, defiant laugh before darkness took her. For a moment, Voldemort looked surprised. Then his expression turned mirthless and furious. He raised his wand. A sickly green light began to pool at the tip. Snape's voice, low and composed at his side, suggested, "Perhaps we can spare their lives for now, Master." Voldemort paused. "We can make a deal with them," Snape said.